And welcome back, boys and girls, for another special edition of the Michael Decon program. I look forward to once again serve you those sounds of salvation. First-time listeners, thank you for joining us. This show is better than a fatal accident. Joining us tonight is Dr. Kevin Perrodin. He's the host of the Safety Doc podcast. I was going to say the Safety Documentation podcast, but that would make no sense. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for allowing me into your hearts and into your minds. Here we are again on a night like this. Abracadabra. Proud to be here. Much respect to all of you out there in the chat room. And of course, much respect to all of those outside of America for supporting the program. Great to see all of you out there. I also wanted to acknowledge our new home on the Conspiracy Radio Network. It's a 24/7 stream with many familiar voices out there. Yeah. Did I say many? Yes. Hello to all of you out there who are currently listening over on CRN, also on TalkStream Live. Hello to all of you, boys and girls out there. Lots to jump into here tonight. So it's that time to get down to brass taxes, and I believe our guest is ready to go. Let's bring him right in. Doctor, how are you?
Good. I'm good. And Michael, just so we're not going with aliases tonight,
Sure.
it's not Kevin Perrodin, it's David Perrodin. I say that when you introduced me, you said Kevin. I know a Kevin Perrodin, and I don't want to take any credit for the fine work that he's doing. So
I was confused because I'm looking at this photo here, and you look like you are part of the mob.
I do. My hair is back. Yeah, I look like my cousin Vinny. I think I only had my hair that way for maybe like a month, but I love that photo. It
Yes.
is. And I still have my hair, right? So I can still pull it off. It's just a little bit more salt and pepper these days.
And you can't see me on camera because I have no webcam in front of me, but what I did for all of you out there, and including yourself, David, in your honor, I combed my hair back. I have the gangster look because I thought you were part of the mob. But, I just wanted to fit in
Wow.
with you.
Well, I appreciate that.
You
Yeah,
got it,
I
my friend.
definitely appreciate that.
Yes, the chat room, they do like your photo, by the way.
I like that image, and I love what you did to it. I'm actually going to ask you to send me that image. After the show,
You
I
got
want
it.
to
No
use
worries.
that in some other places.
No worries, no worries. And I was calling your podcast the safety documentation. I'm not quite sure why I was saying that, but I stopped myself. Yes, it's the safety doc, boys and girls.
Yeah, yeah, the Safety Doc podcast. So just a quick way, safetyphd.com. If people go on YouTube and search the Safety Doc podcast, I have 153 episodes, all released in video, audio, a lot of interviews, and I also do a blog post which is about a 4 or 5 minute read. Um, so it's curated, really high quality content and terrific interviews. And for your listeners, I love your show, Michael, and I think your listeners would find, some of my shows that might resonate too. So they can check out my channel.
Yeah, you have a lot of great content, by the way. And of course, since this is your first rodeo here on the program, I thought
It
we
is.
could, yeah, yeah. I thought we could sort of go over your background here. A moment to sort of x ray your insides.
Yeah, yeah. And the older you get, the X-rays get more interesting. So, um, I was thinking about how did I get to be somebody who one kind of studied safety, but safety is a pretty dry content area, right? I'm much more than a safety guy, quote unquote.
Right.
I am a researcher of chaos theory, and I mean that in the sense where I'm looking at systems under chaos, populations under chaos over time, what manifests, what's happening right now that people have missed. When I wrote my book, School of Errors, what did I find in there that people missed when they studied the Twin Towers attacks? So, um, coming back to a kid, so I remember I lived a block away, not even a block away from a main railroad track in my town. Well, it was the only railroad track, but then actually there was a spur that went in back of our house. So like all the time, trains are going past. Um, but at the end of that road, it wasn't too far, there was the fire station. And back then, right back in the 70s and 80s, whenever there was a fire, they would they would sound the siren in town. And a lot of listeners, maybe are remember this, right, when they're growing up, especially if you're closer to my age, like late 40s. You remember when there was a fire, they used to do the fire siren for like a minute or two, and then the firefighters would come down to the station. Well, I remember as a kid, I'd be like 5, 6, 7 years old. I'd hear that siren. I'd race out of the house and I would run down the road, and I would look straight down the train tracks, and then I could see the doors of the fire station. And eventually, the firefighters would arrive, the doors would open up, and the trucks would leave. And it was fascinating because I was like, well, I know if the tanker truck leaves, it's a country fire, and I know if they do a second alarm, it means this. And you started to learn these things, but it stuck with me, right? I had this big interest from little on. I was always drawn to the onset of kind of disaster and crisis. When I got older, when I got into college, I had one semester I needed to fill out a couple classes, to graduate. and I could take anything that I wanted. That's the benefit of working hard in college, right? But so I looked at it, and I could take firefighting courses, be licensed or trained as a firefighter. So I did that. I took these courses on how to become a firefighter, found them intriguing. Like I couldn't get enough of it, and was also out in the field. Part of the class. Take the fire engines out, practice fighting fires stuff. Um, so then, I got more hands-on safety, and I also loved um, fire investigation, arson investigations, trying to find the exact location where a fire started. Um, so that was, the early kind of embodiment that brought me into this kind of safety world. And then, as someone who was a school administrator for over 20 years, and then worked in other settings in administration, um, there aren't a lot of hands that go up when you say, who wants to be the head of safety here, or who wants to be in charge of safety, drills and activities. And my hand always went up. I always found that stuff interesting. And at the end of my career, I worked at the School for the Blind and oversaw safety operations. And there was a 2 alarm fire during lunch at the School for the Blind. All students and staff evacuated safely. And to this day, I wrote about it in my book, School of Errors. It was a phenomenal, um, successful exit because it was non-negotiable, right? Everybody had to participate in this, and you had to understand how chaos would manifest if you're completely blind. I mean, so
Right.
like ahead of time, I'm working with staff and students. I'm like, how would you get out of here? I mean, because you don't know where the exits are, and I think that also just rocketed me up in my own knowledge of how do people who don't have like vision or hearing or some cognitive impairment or whatever, interface with chaos. How are kids handling chaos right now, or elderly people handling chaos?
Well,
There's
there's a
some
lot
really
of chaos
wacky,
tonight.
crazy stuff.
There's a lot of chaos today. That's for sure.
Absolutely.
My goodness. Right.
So
It's like, where do we even begin when we talk about chaos and what we are currently seeing right now in today's landscape? But before we even get to that part, I imagine you sort of came around the time when, let's say, Columbine was sort of fresh in the minds of many school administrations out there. I'm sure you discussed those sort of scenarios as well, obviously.
I did. I did. And some of my friends are parents who had um, their children either uh, killed or maimed at Columbine.
Oh
So
my.
so yeah, so that it's
I was
interesting.
just throwing that
Um,
around out there.
yeah, I have close friends who are parents who've had Columbine, Sandy Hook, Parkland. Um, so yeah, Columbine, was like anything we hadn't seen anything like that in a school setting. Um, for years. Like if we go back to Bath, Michigan, I don't know, was it the 20s? I presented on PBS a few times on school safety, and you can go through and identify all of the previous school shooting events, but we really didn't have anything like a Columbine. I mean, um, and so right, everybody was benchmarking to Columbine. Like, how should we fortify a school? I mean, fortification came to mind. Um, how do we work on our threat reporting systems? That was a big question. And it's interesting. It was back in 2019. Summer of 2019, they had a referendum at Columbine, and the referendum was to replace the school or rebuild it because it was never Columbine was never supposed to be a school. Did you know that, Michael?
I did not know that.
So no, no, it wasn't. It wasn't supposed
Wow.
to be a school. It was built as a warehouse, and then the community was growing so quickly that they retrofitted it into a school. So it actually had loading docks in the back, and it still does to this day. And so actually, it's structurally a very poor building. Like they're trying to replace it because it's crumbling and things like this. But yeah, the psychology of Columbine was insane. And once I started to talk to the parents, and once I understood Klebold and Harris, and the fact that Klebold and Harris Like, they still worked a job at a pizza place up until a day or two before they did the shooting, and then they just said, "Hey, we need off these days. We might not be coming in after this." I mean, they still did their job. They still went and were slinging pizza, even though they planned this attack. That they were going to carry this. So this psychology is unbelievable, right? Of that. So yeah, and I think a hard part for me as a safety person was everybody wanted to believe that every following school safety event would be another Columbine. So you couldn't get people to think about, yeah, it could be that, or it could be that a tornado hits your school. Like we've had 15 kids die in schools that have been impacted by tornadoes, like in the last 2 decades. And I mean, all of these things. I mean, I think that was a big thing. If people started to believe everything was going to be a Columbine.
Right. And another question I have for you in regards to school shootings. What crosses your mind when people say it was a false flag, that it was a government inside job?
Yeah, I mean, right. Immediately Sandy Hook, comes up, right? Because
Right.
people show images, and again, I mean, what is a source of these images of saying, well, here are gurneys or whatever, but if you go to a high resolution photo, this is clearly not a person on a gurney, like it's a mannequin or something like that. Um, obviously, I know the parents. I know the parents who have directly been impacted, yeah, by this. Losing, not losing, having a child murdered. I mean, that's the way to describe it. Having a child murdered. Um, but it is. I'm not a conspiracy theorist with school shooting. I am very aware that school shootings have opened up a massive industrial complex for selling things to schools.
Sure.
So yeah, but I mean the things there's a lot of things like you know I look at Sandy Hook, for example, study Sandy Hook. Um, had the front entrance not been an option to go in, I mean, a playground was an easily accessible area. You could have driven a vehicle up on a playground and
Right.
things like this. So, um, but yeah, I get asked that question from time to time
I would have
of
to imagine that does get brought up into,
right,
yeah,
certain things don't match up. But I would say like you could look at probably any disaster and things don't match up, right? Nine
right.
11. I mean, I had access to basically anything I wanted with the city of New York when I wrote School of Airs. So, um, School of Airs, I contacted the city and I did a request to work with them to be able to review documents about 9/11. So I
Hmm.
thought I was going to get turned down with that request because who am I? I've been on PBS a few times and I have a PhD. And, I'm a good guy. Like I study this stuff, but yet it would be easy for them to say no. Like we
Sure,
don't have the
sure.
resource. And they said yeah. They said sure. Like we'll work with you. They assigned a research person to me, and I was able to see a lot of the inside things and um, a lot of documents and things that not necessarily were classified, but just never kind of made it into the mainstream because they were developmental documents. I think there are always things you're going to see. I mean, like, why did Tower 6 fall down? I mean, to this, like, I don't know. I'm looking at this up to this day. I'm like, that doesn't seem like that makes sense for a tower that's not directly impacted to fall, because, for example, I, I think like if we talk about kind of conspiracy and things like that, anyone listening, go back and look to the 1977 City Core Tower um, in New York City. So Tower 7. Thank you, Solomon, for correcting me on that.
Yeah, Tower
But
70, yes.
yeah, thank you. So 1977, yeah, City Core, built this 59-story skyscraper, And then a year later, an engineering student pointed out that, hey, this could fail because of the wind dynamics. And Les Mazur, the structural engineer, said, "Oh my God, you're right." So the city, they made this big cover up, and it's open. Les Mazur did a after 20 years, they had a gag order, but 1,000 people knew about it. Um, you can go online, find the lecture he did. I think it was at Stanford in 1996 or whatever. And they covered it up, right? The city covered it up, the newspaper covered it up, the welders, all the various unions. They had to go in and repair this building. And the thing is, they never evacuated the surrounding buildings, and they never told people this building could fall down in a high wind. So, I mean, that's kind of a bird walk, but yeah, in school safety, and looking at sentinel events that happen, um, I do not have any questions that the events themselves are authentic. Right? I absolutely don't. Um, but
I had no idea you
what?
were going to take us down this road here with Building 7, but I'm glad you did. Because there's lots to talk about when you mention Building 7 or you mentioned the tower, and of course, as soon as you said that, for some reason I thought of the University of Texas, the tower shooting there, the very
Yeah.
famous tower shooting of I believe it was August 1st, 1966.
Right. Right.
I just pulled that one out of my back end there.
Yeah. I'll tell you. I mean, so people will ask me, because okay, so I was able to write extensively about the 9/11 attacks, and
Right.
I took on a psychological angle, and I worked with Dr. Paul Rapp, head of military medicine, and then again had access to documents. And my approach was, let's deconstruct and figure out, okay, so 500,000 people are rescued in 9 hours
Yeah.
from Lower Manhattan.
Mhm.
Phenomenal. Like, no, you never practice for this, right? Like, not every Tuesday go down and we'll try to figure this out. So Admiral Loy of the Coast Guard puts out this message: hey, if you have a boat, come down and help us. And over 100 boats, about half of them tugs, come down, evacuate 500,000 people in 9 hours from Lower Manhattan. How the hell does that happen? Like, how does that happen without anybody getting killed? And in 9 hours, this temporary autonomous zone that develops, not a Chaz type thing of Seattle, but this temporary autonomous zone where people just know where to go, know what to do, and they just get people out. They're taking doors off for gangways to walk in. They're putting sheets and they're writing like Hoboken, where they're going, stuff like that.
Hoboken.
But
We haven't heard that in a long time
Hoboken,
here.
yeah.
Yes.
So if you can
Shout
get to
out there.
Hoboken, right, you can get a little bit closer to home.
Yes.
But what we're looking at, right, is we started to look at what were these people experiencing. The average age was 41 years old. Most of the people that were evacuated worked in finance.
Right.
So it gave us a pretty good start. So when they were growing up, what was happening in their lives during their formative years, like when they were maybe like 10 to 15. And what was happening was, for example, in 1983, they would have experienced this in their formative years. Of 1983 was the ABC movie The Day After. So if anyone listening, has seen that movie, ABC television put it out the day after. It was about nuclear war between the U.S. and Russia. It was extremely graphic. You couldn't do it today. There's absolutely no way you could release this type of primetime television. Gorbachev contacted Reagan afterwards. It did some prompting to have treaties to decrease nuclear missiles, ICBMs on both sides. It was horrific, right? And it was a deep psychology too. I mean, it was based around Kansas City, this farm, this progression into nuclear war. So you had that. You had Rocky IV happening. Rocky Sylvester Stallone versus Drago, protagonist, antagonist, West versus
By the way, that was
East.
called The Day After, correct?
The Day After.
Okay.
Yeah. So go in and check out some clips like on YouTube after the show.
Wow.
But the day after it, and I have the movie to this. When I watch it, I mean, yeah, I need to then get out for a day, get out biking or something like that to kind of level my mind, because it is extremely accurate to what would likely happen in a full, partial scale nuclear
In that scenario, yeah.
war.
Mhm.
And so this was done. It's not dramatized, right? I mean, this was really done to be they had the messages coming across the TV, how it would be, how the silos would activate outside of Kansas, how NORAD would be shut down, and then after the big part of the show that was afterwards of the fallout and the radiation and people, but so you had that you had in rock and roll, right? Sting, I Hope the Russians Love Their Children Too. Nana had a song, 99 Red Balloons, which was about,
Great song, by the way.
yeah, yeah, it was
Classic.
about, a battle with NATO in should NATO be in the Eastern Bloc or not. So you had all of the, and I mean, we can go through this, but the thing was, like, when people were growing up in the late 70s, 80s, it was clear that Russia was your enemy, right? The Eastern Bloc was your enemy. And if anything bad happened, our government would step in and protect us. So when people were standing at Battery Park after 9/11, 500,000 people, and they're looking out and these boats are coming in, what they're thinking is they're here to rescue us. Like, these boats are going to save us. And that was a leap of faith, right? Because those boats could have just been getting out of the harbor. Maybe they're fearing that the harbor's mine. They don't want to get bombed or whatever. But people are manifesting this, like they want this rescue to happen. And that's why it was so orderly. So, I'm the only one who's done that, right? Everybody looks at this from a very mechanical standpoint. And I'm like, yeah, there's this psychological transference dynamic that kind of made all this happen. And what's interesting too, Michael, is like that wouldn't happen today. Like I said, if we back people up, of how people have been raised, and people don't have this, we have perestroika, in 86, 87 in Soviet Union kind of fell. Um, I don't know what people would do. People would go very individual. Well, I know what people do exactly. They would go to their cell phones and they would
Yes,
look for what people are telling them to do, or what has the most likes on Facebook
yeah,
for the rescue. So it's really strange. Like, today people are completely looking, in all these directions for more of a popularity, contest of what to do, what gets the most views and likes, and I'll go along with that.
definitely. And of course, looking back at some of the movies that have came in and out of Hollywood, lots of movies could not be done today by today's standards. For instance, like let's say Blazing Saddles. Can you imagine anyone recreating that today? It wouldn't
No.
work.
That's why I always keep a lot of dimes on hand in case I come to one of those, yeah, pole booths out in the desert with my horse.
Right.
No,
And
I can't. I
yes.
can't. Right, Blazing Saddles.
Yeah. And by the way, speaking of which, what do you make of today's sort of how can we even label this? I'm not sure there is a label, but the everything with censorship today. What are your thoughts and opinions, especially with Parlor? Let's go down that route.
Yeah, yeah. So Parlor. I wasn't on Parlor, but I knew a lot of people that had Parlor accounts, and well, it was starting to set up. You could start to see the shots over the bow from Twitter, and from Apple and Google and things of, like, Parlor is a threat, to, because basically they can't they it's what the argument was, it's unregulated speech, or uncensored, and anything that is private, um, should be, doesn't fall under the first, amendment stuff anyway. But I guess I was not surprised, but if Parler when Parler fell, it's like, okay, um, Google's not going to carry the app, got rid of the app, Apple got rid of the app, and then the ISPs are getting pressure. And I saw that actually happening, Michael, in, what was it? It's the not the Hatch Act, the Case Act, the new Copyright Act, which was signed into law December 27th. It had a lot of stuff in there where saying, like, if people wouldn't comply with copyright or whatever, like, the ISPs could be fined.
I see.
And then, so this doesn't have anything really to do with that so much, but it opened the door if I could start to see the thinking of probably, like, the new administration. And yeah, I'm very concerned, that Parler was shut down, right? Because if Parler can be shut down, and the other thing is, like, everyone who's ever posted to Parler, I believe someone went in and hacked this collective, and I could be wrong on this, but I believe somebody obtained, all of the posts that had been made to Parler, and then was going to have some attempt to then publicize this. So, if you or I had posted to Parler, that would be out there. And Parler would be postured as this horrible, you know,
I don't have an account, by the way.
speech, you know,
For those
place.
wondering, I don't have an
Yeah.
account.
So what? So yeah, so definitely it's a silencing. I don't think it makes us safer, right? If it does anything, it drives people more underground. But I didn't perceive. Again, and I guess I wasn't consuming Parlor
I think it pissed off a lot of conservatives who
content.
donated their money.
Yeah.
They invested quite heavily into Parler, and now they lost their cash. So a lot of them are very angry, and understandably. I mean, I would be pissed off too if I lost a good chunk of change.
Oh yeah, yeah. I would be,
I'd be mad too. Sure.
and you know, looking at this of saying, you know, you really have to control now, right? If you're going to do a platform, you have to control the ISP, and what I think there's only 6 like main ISPs in the world, or some Cloudflare access. I don't know enough about that, but it's not that you just have the app or the site or the server. You have to control the ISP, and if Google or Apple decide to kick you off as an app, you're done. So unless you own this entire, you know, you can create this system, maintain it, own it. You have to play by these rules of the big players, or else you get booted off. And it's horrendous, right? I mean, we should have section 230 is crazy, right? It
It
was
is.
designed in a time
Right.
before the contemporary internet, and there have been, you know, many legal attempts to bring free speech into private platforms, extending it, saying, you know, it should, the First Amendment should apply to a Twitter, a Facebook, YouTube, and all of these, which I agree. Like, I think it should. Like contemporary, I think we've come to an area where this is an exchange of
Well,
marketplace
hold on,
for
David.
ideas and
Can you even
innovation.
believe that, David? By the way, that Twitter has become such an issue in our nation.
Yeah, and so I have a Twitter account. You know, I don't have much social media. But I do have a Twitter account, and yeah, I mean, and who would have thought, right, that Twitter would become so polarizing?
Right.
You
I'm
know, the
just
positions, and if you're blue checked,
blown
you know, I'm
away.
not blue checked, but yeah, that, and the thing is, right, Michael, like, you
Right.
know, I work with clients all over the world. You know, I'm a university professor, so everything that I put out there,
You're
I
pretty public,
I have
David.
to, I'm public, right? I don't run an
Yeah.
alias. You know, I don't have a secondary, you know, persona that I'm putting out there. So, and I did
Right.
that from the start, but so I have to measure what I put out there, because anybody could forward content and say, listen, you know, he's taking a position, in the sands of time shift, right? Nothing is laminated to context and situations. So they can say, you know, well, David was in support of whatever, and
Mm.
now that's, you know, this person has turned out to be crazy, or, you know, we're deeming them a lunatic, or
What a
their
time to be
administration's
alive.
gone south.
What a
And
time to be alive, David.
yeah, yeah. So you know, you have to be very aware and measured, which is odd, because again, you know, people are taking what you know, content that you might do today. So I teach legal issue courses to school superintendents and school administrators, right?
Right.
School leaders. And the thing is, you know, I said everything in law. I've also served as an expert legal witness in court cases, and everything is laminated to context and time. So if you did something, you know, if you or I broke a law, you know, and the court case comes in, we'd have to look at what the law was at the time we you know, violated it allegedly. So if it happened 4 years ago, we'd have to go back. Okay, what was the law in 2017? But that's not the way the game works now, right? It's like, what happens, we're going to judge you versus what is in place right now. Like, that's the court of public opinion, and you're screwed with that, because like, you can't say, back at the time I said this or did this was the context and situation. Like, I deem it was acceptable to do this in my discretion, in my actions. This was appropriate to do, or, you know, this is, and people want to judge you against what has happened right now. um, you know, and it's kind of that way in school safety. I mean, schools will be built, and they'll be built to, you know, what is deemed an appropriate safety level at that time, and then people want to judge them. Or, you know, look at the Twin Towers, right? They'll be like, well, why didn't it have this, or why didn't it have that? It's like, well, because, you know, it was built in the 70s. I mean, this is what it was built for, and so retrofits. But we get into this dangerous area right
Do
now.
people bring that
um,
up, by the way? 9/11 still?
Oh yeah, yeah,
Oh my
yeah.
goodness.
They do. I get a lot of questions about 9/11. Oh, what are the questions I get often? I get the Tower 7 question, and I don't know. I mean, Tower 7 to me is puzzling. I'll be honest. I mean, because I'm like, well, it's not like you didn't have the engineering to understand that, for example, New York City, um, every 100 years has so many like hurricane or tropical storm type, experiences. And it's like this building should have been able to withstand some ancillary event happening nearby. Um, so that's like the first one, and then other people will ask questions, and so I just don't have answers. I got a lot of this stuff. Be like, I don't know, um, but they'll ask the questions of um, you know why some things like why was it that Offutt Air Force Base was scrambled that day, and this whole
Yeah.
kind of sequence,
NATO.
and yeah, and some of the weird stuff too, like
They
they'll
stood down.
and some of the stuff like I'll defend, but then like my defense of it falls apart. Like I'll say, well, there's like a national defense system and all that, and then suddenly, what was it like 3 years ago? Hawaii does a missile inbound alert because
That was nuts, right?
apparently,
Good lord.
and so so having to go in then and say, well, not all 50 states have their own radar inbound system. I mean, this is an integrated
Yes, NORAD.
international,
Sorry about that. Yes, creative accidents.
right?
They corrected us
But
there. Yes,
but
NORAD.
then
Sorry.
it's like NORAD, right? But then people are like, well, but these systems can be fatigued, right? They can be evaded. People can work their way around and say something is inbound. And then something happened in Florida in their system. I think it was zombie attack, like 6 months later. But I looked at that and said, damn it. Like, I'm trying to keep people on the path of logical thinking. But even I'm looking at this saying, that doesn't make any sense. Like what happened in Hawaii with that missile alert, that was insane. Like there's no way there should have been a direct access for one person to click a button
Yeah, not
and
at
send
all.
this information. The system doesn't work that way. So there, when we talk about, maybe conspiracy theory and theories and things like that, I'm looking at that and saying, and here was the part too. So I studied that, and I'm looking at the cover. I shouldn't say cover stories, but I'm looking at the initial stories coming out from the government about, well, somebody did this and they've been put on leave. I'm like, okay, and then now they've been put on leave for 2 weeks and they didn't work here. So they're coming up with a story. I'm like, hire me. I'll come up with a lot better cover story for you. I mean, let's just say it was a software upgrade. We had two systems, and one was this space and one was this, whatever. And in the midst of this, I mean, even the cover story for that was so ridiculous. And then eventually the person gets fired and they disappear. Like you can't find that person to this day. Like you can't locate the person that allegedly made this mistake, right? So so those type of things just are crazy in the safety world and chaos world, because I look at some of that and I'm like, well, this doesn't make sense. And also, like just from a logical cover story, if you go back, I study a lot of World War II civilian propaganda. It's in my upcoming book coming out. And actually I wrote like 500 words on it today. I mean, just nobody would make this slip up. I mean, even a novice, right? I mean, you'd sit together in a room for 5 minutes and say, like, here's the story, the official story we're going to put out on this. And and so that gets to be weird these days. And of course, in COVID, like we've seen all of these crazy shifting sands of stories and what's acceptable, mask and not mask, and it can survive, in the air for 20 minutes or 2 minutes or
Yeah,
so.
no one knows. It's a bit of a
Nobody
mystery
knows.
now. Yes, and we'll talk about that in a moment here. And just to finish up with the World Trade Center 1, 2, and 7, those buildings, well, they say it was caused by fire, so that would make it the first steel framed high rise building in history to suffer
Right.
a total fire induced collapse, my friend. So that's one hell of a fire, right?
Yeah. No, no. In studying that, it's again, I'm not a structural engineer, right? But from a face validity standpoint, it's confusing to understand, um, how that happens. Um, so yeah, no, I don't have an answer. And what one of the things in analyzing 9/11 too was, the behavior of people was really was you can just tell how programmed people are. Like they weren't accepting that the tower had been struck. They're staying at their desk thinking, this is a drill. Like I'll just wait this out and the alarm will stop. I mean, it usually does. And a lot of hundreds of people stayed at their desk saving files because back in 2001 you still had to save files. It took a while on your 3.5-inch floppy drive or to your server, and before they exited, and a lot of them died and some of them made it out, but they had the records where they could see people doing this. But it is, yeah, that the whole the 9/11 is very, it was very perplexing. And also one of the things, and I just talked about this recently, um, the level of communication that came out from Rudy Giuliani
Oh my.
and was very
The mayor of
was
America.
yeah.
Good
Yeah, the mayor of
Lord.
America. So the communication that came out for 9/11 was very rapid and it was very precise. This is what happened. The tower was struck. These
Right.
are the subways that are operating. These are the areas that are closed off. And then they would repeat it, which is very effective. Like this is like a model like strategy, but like it
It seemed
doesn't
pretty
match
rehearsed,
a
right?
lot of yeah, like Michael, it doesn't match a lot of other disasters. Like people don't usually have that level of information that quickly and able to replicate it. We didn't even
Correct.
see it like in the tennis. What is it? The Nashville bomber who drove his RV down and exploded it. I mean, like there wasn't that level of information coming out rapidly with that. So that is it stands alone. Like I'll point stuff out and say like this is different than like these other disasters, like the Murrah City building bombing or whatever. Like we didn't have this, and even to this day, like we don't have um, this type of information. So it's strange. I mean, I was looking at it from some different perspectives and different angles. Um, I but yeah, I mean, to me, like Tower 7 will always be just this massive mystery. Understanding because I've studied extensively the City Core Tower, which was built approximately the same time, the engineering that went into that, how a building could fail that wasn't directly hit. I don't know. I mean, I have no idea how that could happen.
It was magic.
It, Yeah, right. Of course, we're talking about this not to bring to light to it, but objectively, right? So objectively, when we look at this and we try to make sense of
It's
this,
hard
how do you
to.
how do you make sense of it?
It's hard to. Building 7 just goes down like in free fall fashion.
Right, knowing that Building 7 right needed to be built to certain standards for not only possible earthquake, right, but also likely hurricane or tropical storm. You just parallel that over to the engineering specs that had to go into the City Core Tower in '77,
Right.
and it just doesn't make sense.
A lot of it doesn't make sense, and I still remember multiple eyewitness accounts of multiple explosions that went off that morning too.
Right,
People in FDNY.
right, right. Yeah, I wasn't there. I I've talked to people, first, who were there, people who responded to the scene, but of course, I mean, they're seeing a small, fraction of the whole panorama of what's going on. Um, but I'm yeah, and the thing with 9/11, right, is like someone who wrote about 9/11, I said, had it been a rainy day or cold or something like that, like this would have been substantially different, like the harbor rescue and people knowing where to go and stuff like this. So it's just kind of this weird context too of like it happened on this sunny, warm morning in New York with this, and I measured. I knew what the water, the waves were extremely low that morning too. It would have made a rescue much more difficult had it been, just like even a typical morning. This was like a really calm morning, but yeah, so these are the things, I sit up and at night and I'm putting stuff together and different, research and whatever. I'm like, I don't know, I can't. I got to put this out there in a file where it's the I don't know file. I can't make sense of this.
I hear you. It's a very strange event in our nation's history, no doubt. very odd one. And of course, we have another situation that happened recently. The Capitol was stormed. What do you make of that?
Yeah, so right. January 6th, we have the insurrection at the Capitol. Of what it's being called, right? Insurrection at the Capitol, I guess. Um, so so looking at that, right? I don't. So that's it's very perplexing to look at that versus right now when the Capitol has been fortified with what 25,000 troops and there's many perimeters and things like that. Um, how was it that the Capitol, for example, was just that easy
It was
to
so
get
easy,
into
right?
that day? I mean, I'm like, how is that? We from I mean, summer
Well, the reports
the
now are saying, David, that someone had inside knowledge.
boy, I again, I look at this and I'm like, it seemed like it was substantially unfortified for what they probably should have anticipated through just regular intelligence. I mean, just intelligence, Michael, that you and I would be able to decipher from the media and understanding the riots of May and June. Close to me is Madison, Wisconsin, which had substantial, damage to retail and the Capitol from riots. So then, you're thinking, okay, if there's an election and the electors are coming in, why wouldn't you have a stronger presence around the Capitol, just in general? I mean, what if someone's driving up like a Timothy McVeigh or you had the Nashville, Tennessee RV bomber? I mean, wouldn't that be or at the front of your mind saying, we need to push out a perimeter because maybe someone is going to do this? But um, I'm just saying, just from a regular intelligence and defensive, um, thinking, wouldn't you expect that you'd have a heightened presence? And the other part is, so people get in, right, and it seems like they got in fairly easy into the Capitol, but they didn't do much damage. Also, which was it was interesting. Like I'm watching this on live stream. I had three screens in front of me. I had split up, and people are walking between the felt ropes, just like at the bank or whatever, you have the felt ropes you have to walk in between. They're walking in between the ropes. They're not knocking the ropes down and going over and setting painting on fire. I mean, they're in and they're walking between the ropes. And yeah, of course, and there's some doors broke down, stuff like that. Um, but but yes, I mean, so now this has been completely magnified into this is an insurrection, and this is this attempt to overthrow a government. I'd say, I don't think they were trying to install a new government. They were trying to protest or riot against what they perceived was a stolen election. But I get to get drill down to your question, Michael. It struck me as this is a very unfortified area for what they should have anticipated. So like with what they've done right now with all these fences, all of these concrete barriers, 25,000 National Guard plus, all these military vehicles. What the hell are they expecting is going to happen this week? I mean, what are they believing is going to happen, because I don't anticipate a domestic threat that would warrant this type of magnifying of forces. Is there some thought that there could be this international, which I don't think is going to happen, but I don't think that what is portrayed right now matches. And I've also seen the language change today. I saw articles, headlines coming out of scattered protests anticipated at all 50 state capitals, which is a lot different than 48 hours ago when it was all 50 state capitals are on alert. Here in Madison, they boarded up the windows of the state capitol. They
Oh,
had it on
yes.
the news.
The
But
FBI memo.
yeah, the FBI memo. And I'm looking at that saying, I don't think so. I just don't, I know too many people. I'm too well connected. Um, yes, I mean, in May, June, July, this was very probable. I mean, police forces being told to stand down. Minneapolis, a precinct was taken over. Portland, Seattle, all that. I had a friend in Seattle who was inside of Chaz, who was taking pictures and giving me reports like every day. And so it's like is right now a portrayal of strength, just to try to convey to people that we are a strong government, or I don't get it, because I just don't. I think the time for what you see right now was 2 weeks ago. Like, it should have been fortified at that point, or why not fortify at the election? Why wait
Why
until
wait now?
now? I mean,
Yes.
those are the logical questions if you sit down with anybody in intelligence, or and you ask that
Well,
question.
someone's
Well,
getting fired, that's for sure.
right. Why wait until now? Um,
Yeah, and by the way, I had read way back in 2012, Homeland Security was actually preparing for civil war. Um, yeah, I definitely do remember reports going way back to 2012 talking about Homeland Security preparing for a civil war. They were doing all these exercises, I remember, back in 2012. And I'm thinking, maybe they knew something back then. Maybe they were preparing for this event coming up, David.
it's a you know it's possible, right? And what would it take to have some, you know, I- it's probably more like a balkanization, right? When the Soviet Union fell in the 80s, and the Ukraine split off and all that, I mean, balkanization was pretty fast. Balkanization of, you know, Texas, Nevada, Arizona, whatever, and then, California, Washington going in one direction and whatever. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think that was plausible. I'm actually, I look back on January 6th, and I'm like, if you would have introduced somebody into that, an actor, for example, who looked like Donald Trump,
Hmm.
and you would have surrounded that person with six Secret Service, right? You just, you hire this, like, if somebody just comes in and they're role playing this, and suddenly they're marching toward the Capitol, and they're saying, we have to defend the Constitution. I think you could have tipped that into a complete shootout, like into a complete battle. Um, if you a few things would have come into play there, and
Well, I think a lot
if
of things didn't play out that way because plans were unfolded
yeah,
by law enforcement. So luckily that didn't happen. And of course, I saw footage of some of these people out there wanting to hang Mike Pence, by the way. They even brought up some sort of noose, some sort of entrapment out there.
yeah, yeah, I saw that too.
That's pretty wild.
It's it is,
Holy
and what
shit.
is it? The news report saying, it was 1 minute prior to the entrance of where Mike Pence was, that he was evacuated. They got him out a minute before protesters or rioters got into the building, and yeah. The thing is with that, right, is once you kind of tip into that the mob mentality, once one person just goes over the
That's all it
edge,
takes, man. Just
it is
one effing guy.
it we had, so one of the things in my area, so I live close to the University of Wisconsin Madison, and for years they would have this thing called Freak Fest, and it was on Halloween, and the college kids, and they'd come from all around, be like 50,000 kids, downtown, and drinking, partying, stuff like that. And one year, like one kid, he's kind of liquored up, and just it's real motivated, picks up a bench that's on next to the road, that
Uh-oh.
people just sit on, and he takes it and he hurls it and he smashes it through this window of I don't know, a business or a house or whatever. And then as soon as he did that, like, everybody kicks in, and they're just like, so it's this cascade effect. And you're right. I mean, once the first shot is fired,
Monkey see, monkey do, David.
monkeys, it is.
Right.
And I think I think January 6th, in a forensic analysis, looking back, we're really fortunate that somebody didn't come in and just say, listen, I'm not going to make it out of here alive. I'm okay with that. I have, all of my weapons, and I'm going to take as many people with me as I can. I mean, it's horrific as it sounds, right? But if someone comes in with that mindset, that day, we could be looking back and say the 1 or 2 thousand people killed, or somebody brings in their RV with explosives or something like that. Um, which sounds crazy, but also it happened, what, 2 weeks ago in Nashville. So we know these things can happen. Um, I think we're really fortunate, because then it also exposes how weak and vulnerable, I guess, the government is.
Yes,
Right?
we
Like,
look
like,
very. That was very embarrassing, I have to say. I don't really care what side you are on, Democrat, Republican, Green Party, Independent. I don't care. That should have never have happened, David. Not in our country.
Yeah, yeah. How do we miss that? I mean, I've worked with some of
Not good. Not good.
the yeah, the best intelligence folks out there who would never make this slip up, who would never do this on their watch. So yeah, I mean, and so again, ask a question like, why would you fatigue the system? Would you well, would you fatigue it and I guess have this where it could set up in order then to have a stronger presence on inauguration and then going forward to have stronger fortification around government buildings or to have everybody has to have an ID, right? I've talked a lot, Michael, always about social credit score in China
Oh, yes.
and how everybody has their social credit score. It's public.
That's right.
And I said, I looked at the work at Tom Scott. I said, it'll be in the US in 3 years. I said, everybody will have a social
Yeah,
credit
you're
score.
right. Yeah.
It'll be public. And so does this forward a social credit score of saying, we need to know who people are. So if you went and you participated in the quote unquote insurrection, then for your social credit score, this has this impact. You go
Yeah.
from an 800, which is perfect, to a 500. And then people around you are notified, hey, this person has a 500. They can file a disassociation claim. And then, they that they're not, going to interact with you anymore. So Tom Scott did a video, and it's about 8 minutes long, and so anybody interested after this show, um, it's called social credit score, and and I think it's spot on of what it would look like, and he does Great Britain,
Yes.
what
And
it
by
would
the way,
look
for
like if
those wondering, we are talking to Dr. David Perrodin. That is the voice you are hearing right now. He's got a great voice.
thank you.
Yes, that's David Perrodin, PhD, boys and girls. Look him up. The Safety Dog Podcast.
Yeah, the Safety Doc podcast of 153 episodes, a lot of terrific guests, including Larry Lawton, America's biggest jewel thief. Larry was on my show, and I asked Larry one question. I said, Larry, tell me about how you found out about 9/11, because he was in Ted Kaczynski level, um, uh, security
Yeah.
in the federal prison system, where you only found things out because someone smuggled in a piece of paper they folded 100 times and put it under their tongue and gave it to you. So, how did you find out when Larry Lawton got out of jail, Michael, in 2007? He stopped the Greyhound bus stopped at a gas station. They were going to get food. And he's like, why are we stopping here to get food? This doesn't make any sense. And so I get out, and there's a Subway attached to the gas station, right?
Subway.
And he never knew this. He never knew this because, I mean, where he was at, he's locked down for 23 hours a day. He had no idea. So he goes in and he's looking up, and he said, I had a panic attack. I wasn't used to these choices of everything's, made. These choices are made for you. These decisions are made for you in prison. So he went back and he sat down in the Greyhound bus. He called like a relative, and he said, I'm going to kill the driver or do something like that, so I can go back into prison because I can't handle this.
Oh,
And
my.
thankfully the relative talked him out of that. But yeah, and Larry also
Jeez.
said, so he has this flip phone and someone has a smartphone. So he's like, show me this. What is this like? He had never seen that. But that's just kind of an interesting,
I
interesting
never knew
aside
that.
there
Yeah.
of what happens when you don't have communication provided to you. How do you find out what's real and what's not? And I presented
Yeah.
on this in 2019. I was on PBS, and for any just when you present on PBS, that's like a 6-month process when you have a feature on PBS, because there's so much development and so much ahead of time. Everything has to be checked over by PBS and their lawyers.
A lot of pre-production, I'm sure.
Right.
Yeah.
A lot of pre-production, and I had some stuff that I was citing from Russia, where they were taking some still images of like the
Wild.
Mona Lisa, and they were starting to animate them so you could have the Mona Lisa talk, right? Or you could have anybody. If I took a picture of you, Michael,
Mhm.
if I took like 5 pictures of you and I gave it to this one lab in Russia, they'd be able to produce you giving a speech, a 10-minute speech on any topic I wanted.
Oh, a deep fake. That's what they
A
call.
deep fake, yeah.
Wow.
So I
Nice.
was able to present like 26 seconds of this deepfake technology, and then talk about it. But I also brought up the point of saying the first legislative hearing in the US was in 2019 about what we should do about deep fakes, as far as compromising our system of understanding, what is authentic and what
Yeah,
isn't.
that could
And
be next
actually,
level propaganda.
oh, it is in California. California is the only state that has a bill where you can't do a deep fake of a politician 60 days before election.
Oh,
They put
shit. Okay.
right, they put that in place last year. But how do you monitor that? And they also said, well, if it's obviously satire, like then it doesn't apply. Well, that's subjective. But we talk about deep fakes. Little Michaela, Lilmiquela, Little Michaela
Michaela.
is an avatar. She's a deep fake. She's created by Calvin Klein. Calvin Klein has a team of engineers and like creative artists or whatever they badge these people. And so she if you go online, like she has 1 million followers on Instagram, all this, she interacts with people. She doesn't exist. There's no little Michaela. She's like an 18-year-old, so she's wearing the clothes, she's being at certain venues and things like this. And people are completely convinced, she's authentic. This is a real person, she's doing real things. So, but what does it take then to cross that over and start to have deep fakes of politicians, right? Like there was one presentation Trump did, and I don't know, maybe like 3-4 days ago or something. Somebody sent it to me and they said, "Look at this," and I looked at it and I said, "That's obviously a deep fake." Because I looked at the neck and I kind of looked at the things that the people in the intelligence community were teaching me before I did the PBS presentation. I'm like, that's not real. Like there's something not right about that.
Well,
And
people are very odd, David. As you know, there's a Japanese man who married a hologram as well.
whoa,
Yeah,
whoa.
so Japanese are a very strange culture. When it comes to
So yeah,
sex, for some reason, they're very open. You can walk around, where you would find liquor on the corner. You could
right.
find women's underwear, used underwear from women. It's very odd. It's a very strange sort of view, but I mean, they view us as being, very suppressed sexually here in America.
Oh, right, right. Yeah, I have a number of friends in Japan. I have relatives actually who live in Japan. So I mean,
Konnichiwa.
it's a fascinating culture. I would love to spend a year or
It's a pretty
two
wild
in.
place. I mean, I would have fun. I mean, I love mixed martial arts and the Japanese. They're all about that and pro wrestling, and I would
Yeah.
love to be out there as well. It'd be fun.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And just to, I love history, right? So, it'd be
A lot of
fun
history there too. Yeah.
to see that. And what, a couple of my friends who live in Japan say, the tremors are because of the ring of fire and where Japan is situated. The tremors are daily. Like,
Oh, those
the
earthquakes.
sidewalks
Yeah.
crack and, a little bit of water comes up and stuff like that. Just people just get used to it. But, but yeah, so I mean, um, yeah, interesting stuff. And it is, we talk about that. I mean, they asked me like, what's happening in the U.S., right? Because when the Kenosha riots were happening in Kyle
Oh
Rittenhouse,
yes.
so I mean, I live in Wisconsin. That's a couple hours away from me. But of course, when they think of me, Wisconsin, whatever, they're thinking this is happening like close to me. Like, how are you? You okay? Did this affect you? And I'm like, yeah, it didn't. I'm not close to it. Like this didn't um, directly impact me. But as living in Wisconsin, it was really bizarre to not see the governor uh, call for the National Guard when. And so I'm listening to the police scanner that entire night. And I did a show on that night, and I think I went for like 3 hours. And I said, this town is just getting destroyed, right? They had like 35 fire department calls, and
It was a
protesters are
mess.
going out. They're running over the fire hoses. They're cutting up the fire hoses and stuff. I'm like, this whole town is about to just be completely destroyed.
Yeah.
And yet, like, nothing was there wasn't this call until like a day later to get the National Guard. So as you said, I mean, there's these weird
It's
delays.
a very strange delay, and it was a bit of a disaster. Something that we should have not seen going
Yeah,
down in the streets, but it happened.
it did happen. It did. And I think I talked that night and, of being, a firefighter formerly, and said, the thing is, like, I would be concerned with, because they were fighting all these fires, that the water supply would be down. Like all of the water towers would be drained out. So, I'm kind of like saying people are probably going to be told their water is going to be shut off for a day because this stuff needs to replenish. And, if I would make sure that you had enough water and stuff because these systems are all going to start to fail if this happens a second night in a row, which no one talks about, right? Like nobody comes on TV and tells you about this type of stuff. They're just like trying to get a camera in. And so I was doing a live stream, Michael, the night that the Madison, Wisconsin riots initially, the first night that happened, and I was I was very critical of a news station in Madison who was having a young reporter. She was maybe like 25 years old, and so didn't have a lot of experience. And the guy in the studio is like, go closer to this like jewelry store where it seems like a lot of people are really agitated. Well, instantly, boom, the window gets smashed. People are running in, taking jewelry, all this other stuff, and she ends up with like a high end purse in her hand that someone like just runs out and throws at her or something. And I was posting, I'm like, get these people out of there. Like this is a this is a chaotic, unpredictable scene. These people aren't trained for this. Like they could easily have a brick thrown at them or just like killed if this goes wrong. And I was booted off social media, my live stream, everything's shut down instantly, instantly gone. And I'm like, I'm trying to help you out. Like I understand this stuff from a high end chaos level, and I can see that you're leading someone into their potential, death. Like you are basically telling them, walk right into this. You're young. It'll probably work out for you. I'm here at the studio. And I was
Right.
booted. I was gone. Um, so it was weird. Yeah. That was a weird moment for me because I was like, I know this stuff, right? I've been where this is. I went to school down there. I got my PhD down there. I know exactly these areas, and it's like it's like watching a horror film. You're like, don't open that door, and I'm trying to contribute to this in a positive way to the point where I'm trying to I'm calling the station. I know people at the station. I'm like, this person is in real danger. And I was shut down, locked down, all my social media accounts, anything. I was done for 24 hours. Crazy, right, Michael?
It is. It is, but that's where we are nowadays. And as we mentioned before, Twitter has become such a huge issue. And we were talking about Parler a moment ago. And David, I have to say, we are seeing corporations become bigger than government. And
Yeah.
it's what I've been saying on the show for the past 4 years now. And people today are crying on Twitter about YouTube removing their channels or them being demonetized. All those things have happened to me numerous times, and I didn't get angry. I didn't get on my soapbox and stomp my little feet. No, I didn't care. I wasn't threatening to sue anyone. I just moved forward. And unfortunately, if you try to fight with these big corporations and you don't have that much money, well, um, best of luck to you, David. That's the way it goes. These people have become giants. They're the ones who tell you the real truth. You and I are just liars to them.
We are, right.
But
Yeah,
here we go,
and
though. Here's the thing, though. Here's the thing. Since we were talking about Parler, when does freedom of speech go too far, David? They say this insurrection that happened, that we witnessed, the storming of the Capitol, they say all these things were planned on Parler, and that's the reason why they are being shut down. Well, one of the many reasons why they are being shut down. What do you say about that, David? Do you think freedom of speech can go too far?
right. So, the First Amendment, uh, so it's a great question, right? That's been debated uh to length. As you said that, I'm thinking about I did a presentation for a state librarians association, and they were specifically wanting me to talk about First Amendment. So I did, and I was talking about a man who went into I think it was Missouri. I'm pretty sure it was Missouri. Went into a library, and it was after a shooting, like at a Walmart. in Texas or something like that, but it was like 2 years ago. Went in and he said, the person that did that shooting at that store, they didn't go far enough. And then the person went
Hmm.
in and was like looking up stuff about the shooting on the computers at the library. Well, the librarian called the police and said, "I believe this person that is threatening and all of that," and they arrested this person. So this person was not threatening the librarian, did not have a weapon on them, and was searching for articles which you or I could search for. That we could find these things, and they were taken into custody, eventually released because it wasn't deemed that they were, yeah, a threat to society or a threat to this person. Um, but boy, so when you mention this, it also brings me to a recent discussion I've had with people in the 3D printing community about kind of the First Amendment and copyright and First Amendment kind of cross over a little bit. But people in the 3D printing community, for example, are very afraid, or not very afraid, but they're very aware that new 3D printers might all be online. Like you're going to have to ping to whatever, and
Yeah, that's an
what you
issue.
print, you'll be given rights to print under like a copyright, which is so we kind of get into this innovation. If you stifle freedom of speech, you stifle innovation. That ultimately is kind of the connection. That's why freedom of speech was put into the First Amendment, because we want to be able to have ideas, have opposing ideas, debate those, and then eventually, come to this point of innovation as a society.
Right.
So, can First Amendment give too many rights? I don't think so. I mean, I don't think we need to be monitored. I don't think the First Amendment is broken, but I think the First Amendment, when it's on Twitter and all of these different social media platforms, the question comes up of um, how do we monitor if people are saying things in these platforms which could be perceived as a threat of harm to self or others? What are we doing? How are we responding to that? And what obligation does the platform have? I mean, this goes back to a crazy question. Like 30 years ago, if someone called in a bomb threat, and they're like, you called in a bomb threat, the person that received the bomb threat, imagine if they would turn around and they would sue AT&T, the phone carrier, because it'd be like, well, you had the phone line. If you didn't have the phone line,
Right.
this person would have never been able to call in a bomb threat. Um, I think we're at this amazing time actually with creativity. We saw Creative Commons come together. For example, Creative Commons, um, in my opinion, works on the good side of preserving freedom of speech and then also ideas with copyright. Came together during the coronavirus and enabled people to print masks that had been protected through intellectual property, IP, copyright, and then also produce some ventilator parts. They worked with companies, so companies would say, we'll give a lapse on our intellectual property for the specific component, and you can print it and bring it to your local hospital if you have this printer. So I think I really believe IP, or my perception is First Amendment. If we get in the point where we're regulating First Amendment, we are going to shut down innovation, and everyone is going to have to worry about um, my next job, like something I said, or even if it was protected under First Amendment, right? Your freedom of speech, your freedom to assemble. Well, assemble, right? I mean, if you are in Washington on Washington D.C. on January 6th, as long as you're there before 6:30 and not participating in damaging property and trespassing, right? I guess trespassing. I don't know if you can necessarily if that was called trespassing, but if you're there, if you're just physically there, and it's 6:30, there's a curfew, and by 6:30 you leave, right? And you have a sign, and you're maybe having your political opinion put forward on the sign, but you're not hurting anybody. You're not charging the Capitol. You're not aiding and abetting. You're not putting a pipe bomb somewhere. But those people now, because they've been there, they're time stamped. The picture of them is there in that location. Their
Yeah.
jobs, they're done.
Yeah, they're in the
not getting a
no-fly
job
zone
anywhere.
now. Yeah, they can't even fly out now.
They can't fly. Their families turned on them. They're not going to have employment anywhere. People will dox them. I've talked to many
Right.
people who have been doxxed. We had it happen close to me. 15 miles away from me, there was an event where this was amazing. This made national news. So,
Really?
yeah,
Oh
yeah,
shit.
high school. This maybe like 2 years ago. High school, 3 years ago. High school students were on the steps of a courthouse, and they appeared to be giving what was a Nazi salute,
Oh
and
my. Okay.
it was captured. So if you type in Nazi salute plus kids in Wisconsin, you'll probably find it right away. Um, now, anyway, this picture gets out there, and it's real complicated, right? Because the person taking the picture was a former social studies teacher who turned into a photographer, and but the thing is, so I know this from a lot of different angles, right? Because I know this as a school safety expert and teaching classes to school administrators, but I know that teachers in that district, especially if they were teaching social studies and things like that, their information was posted online. Here's the teacher who teaches social studies. Go to their go to their house, not necessarily bring harm to them, but make them know that this, we don't tolerate this. And the social studies teacher's like, I've only been here 2 years. Like, I didn't do this. I mean, this image, I had nothing to do with this. And you can see how people have to separate themselves from employment, move, get out of town, just because this happened. So again, that's the thing that's really if you go anywhere. I interviewed Clay Martin on my show. Clay Martin is a former Marine. He's specializes in reconnaissance sniper. And one of the things we talked about, he's the author of the books Concrete Jungle and Prairie Fire. And Clay's like, he goes, today, Dave, I wouldn't put a bumper sticker on my car for anything, or my truck. I wouldn't put a bumper sticker, political party I'm for or against, or even if it's like a sports team or whatever, because you don't know how people will receive that.
Yeah,
Like
people are crazy nowadays, David.
yeah, they're like, I don't like the whatever NBA team because of this, or because like their position on social justice or whatever it is, and then you come back and all your windows are smashed out, and there's key marks all over your vehicles. So he was saying, just don't do it. But he's like, I'm not a coward, right? But just there are certain things which at this point don't even take that risk.
I wouldn't
Don't
take that
even,
risk either.
yeah, and so I mean it was that type of discussion, that type of advice, and even too, he's like, when you're shopping, go with apparel that kind of blends into things, and just have a kind of a low profile. And so Michael, one of the things that came up in my superintendent class this fall, I had this question come up from multiple superintendents, and they said, what should we be telling our staff if they're driving, if they're on a team bus and they're going to a sporting event or whatever, and they get caught in a protest that turns into a riot? Like, what should we do?
Good question.
And I'm like, yeah, I don't know. Like, that's the question. So I contacted my insurance carrier and I said, what do you advise me to do, or my family, if we are in an area and a protest happens and we are unable to our vehicle is locked in place, right? Gridlock because of this.
You're
And
with the basketball team and you're surrounded by the Proud Boys.
yeah, exactly.
That was a joke, but yes, that could happen.
No, but what do you do? And suddenly, they're one vehicle away from you, and you have students. So what do? And you can't back up. I mean, do you ditch the vehicle and the vehicle is a loss and you run for it, or what's the guidance? And of course, no one's going to give you, no one's going to tell you what to do in that situation. They don't want to take a position. I mean, um, legislators, state organizations, and I would pull this back to my superintendents. I say, what are your state organizations saying about this? How about your state superintendent organization? What is their position? Well, we haven't asked them. I'm like, well, send them this question. You're paying them money. You're paying $500 a year to be a part of this group. Ask them for some guidance on what you should do if this happened, or what if your school, for example, got surrounded by, whatever, rioters that turned, and maybe it wasn't because of something that happened at your school. It was a block away, and now it's moved to your school. Your perimeters.
Well, actually, we don't even have to worry about that these days, David. Not with COVID. Not with remote learning.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah, those days are over.
Right. Yeah, and as a safety expert with COVID, if you want to go down that rabbit hole, I'm glad to go down there, because
You've talked extensively about COVID before. I think we could sort of switch topics slightly here. I mean, one of your last episodes you did that I had a chance to listen to, you talked to someone by the name of Carl Hopf.
Carl Hopf, yeah.
Hopf, yeah. He's a great guest, by the way. I did enjoy that
Thanks.
episode. I
Thank
did.
you.
Yes, I really liked your opinion on COVID and the tracking app. And, that's really something else. When does it all end, though? What is the end game? And that's the question I have as well for everyone out there, not just you, David, but in terms of the civil unrest and the political divide in our country. I mean, when does it
Right.
all end? I mean, it's going to take one side to kill off the other side. Is that what we are coming down to, David? I'm wondering. I mean, pretty soon, everything is going to be like this. Pretty soon, you're going to hear this
Well,
all day.
the Purge. Yes. Yes. The Purge. The Purge.
Right.
Wow. Well, first of all, thank you for mentioning Carl. Carl, doesn't do much in terms of putting himself out there to the public because one of the things with Carl also is Carl works at a much deeper level than what was portrayed on the show for the protection of what he does professionally. That was a very limited representation of what he does and what he has access to. um, so so Carl, you know I, Carl was absolutely fascinating. I've known him for a while. He wanted to be on the show, and he deliberated, whether or not to come on the show again. We talk about if this stuff gets made public.
Yeah.
This is it's when someone is telling me I'll be on your show, but I might lose my job. I'm
Oh
like, well,
my.
then, don't come on my show for that. But he got to a point where we got it to information that was just available publicly. But Carl's the type of guy, and I think he mentioned this during the show, who's worked in high security
Word.
virus labs,
Yeah.
where he'd say, Dave, like if I have to leave work, it takes me 2 hours because I have to go from like decompress, the chamber 1 to chamber 2 to chamber 3, like getting all the layers off before I can go. And so he's talking about the apps and stuff like that. And so so I've got the app on my phone. All of us do, right? I mean, it's downloaded, and
I
although
haven't
they're
used it.
saying, quote unquote, that you have to download a companion app to make it work, at face validity, Michael, like what the hell sense does that make? I mean, like I've never had an app where I've had it partially on my phone and then I have to download the other half of it. Like that doesn't make any sense.
Not at all.
Um,
And I mean, there
so,
is that issue with uh,
so
HIPAA. They can't really tell you anything either.
Well, right, but of course they have the information. Because they know. I mean, they ping it. Every device has its unique identifying information number. I wrote about this in School of Theirs. How often do we get inundated with these notifications of? Now, I got one, through like my state license for, my professional license. Oh, we've been hacked, and all of your, information was out there. So, we're going to give you a year of monitoring or whatever, and let us know. I mean, that happens all the time, right? I'm still waiting for my $200 settlement from Yahoo, that class action. Any of us that had a Yahoo account where they got in there, but so this thing is, I mean, you look at it and it's like, yeah. So I'm looking at the app, and Colorado, for example, it's different state by state. Like Wisconsin didn't do much of a rollout on it. They didn't do much of a public campaign, which is kind of weird because it's a Democratic state, and I would have just expected Wisconsin to that. But my friends in other states were showing me what was coming across their TV screens on their phones. Like, download the app and we'll be able to track you. So if you're 15 minutes close to somebody, it would notify you, and then a contact tracer would contact you. So you stop, right, Michael? You stop and you just think, so what does that mean? What does that mean if somebody contacts me? Like, then what is going to happen? They're going to ask me who I was in contact with, but they already know because they have this information, right? I mean, they ultimately have this information.
They have your info, but they're not going to give you the details, from what I understand.
Oh no, but they know who I've been around.
I want to know who it was. I
I
want their phone number. I want their address. I want their social security number. I want it all.
Oh God.
I want to know who they are.
The work that I've done, Michael.
I want to take them
all
out.
of that stuff is out there, right? All of it, and we've seen it in the third-party doctrine case of Carpenter versus United States in 2017. I mean, it doesn't take much, obviously, to get as much information as you want about anyone. Down to visits to the doctor and things like that. I mean, it's pretty easy to mine all of that type of stuff. So yeah, these apps are really
Intrusive.
it's really crazy because I mean, yeah, obviously HIPAA considerations, and we know these Bluetooth things aren't very secure anyway,
Not at
right?
all.
So, so I mean, it's like, it wouldn't take much to even create a spoof type app. Um,
That's all it
but
takes.
but what's the end game? So I looked at this. I looked at how Colorado rolled it out, and I said, basically, the conclusion here is like everybody in Colorado that had the app would be notified that they should stay home because they've been in close proximity with someone who's tested positive for COVID. So basically, it was just telling everyone to stay home. I'm like, there was no other conclusion. As a researcher, as a PhD researcher, is like someone who is very trained in qualitative statistics. you know, I'm a very based person. I look at this, I'm like, wouldn't the conclusion be that this would just ultimately tell everybody to stay home? So, and then, is it trying to get people to stay home through the elections? So you don't have a protest when, Biden wins the election? Is that the end game here? Or is it just, is there more to it? Is it more social conditioning to go on? Which I guess, I'd have to try to wrap my head around what is that, what is that really looking like? What is the purpose of that? Um, but yeah, the app, I mean, frankly, the app, um, I don't see the value in having the app. I mean, if you really ask the hard questions, not even the hard questions, just the normal questions that you or I would ask, anybody would ask. So how does this help me? Well, it'll notify you if you've been around somebody. Well, likely, if I've been in a Walmart, I've probably been around somebody, right, that says a positive because there's hundreds of people in there. So, like, if I don't know who it is or I don't know what am I supposed to do? I'm supposed to stay home. But here's the thing, Michael. So when COVID like really started, like it was about March 15th in the U.S. I have a
Right.
timeline on this. I have detailed it out. We were supposed to go to Disney, so right, like we had everything packed, and we were all ready to fly out from Milwaukee to Disney, and about a week before, I'm watching this stuff kind of. I'm like, man, I don't think this is going to happen. I think Disney's going to be shut down. NCAA is shutting down. NBA is shutting down. I'm doing contingencies. Like who do we know in Orlando that we could, get a vehicle from and drive back to Wisconsin? Um, but yeah, so I mean, it was absolutely this kind of terrifying, cascade effect that you had to front up with of what's happening. So I did 13 videos that I never made public. 13 face validity videos, and I also created my network. Right, I had a network of people all around the world, like 6 people in the U.S., 3 people outside of the U.S. And every 48 hours, I would contact them and say, what are you observing? Not not what do you hear on the news? What do you observe? I observed this. I went to the store. I observed this today, David. I observed this. And then we started to find some real interesting things. And I observed, for example, my postal carriers did not wear gloves, did not wear any type of PPE. So
Did they
I
get
knew that
sick?
I knew that a household, a few houses up from us, had tested positive for COVID.
There we go.
They notified me. They said, we've tested. We're here for 14 days. We're all quarantined. It was a larger family, but the postal carrier stopped there, went to their mailbox, put their mail in, took the mail out, went to a few other houses. Eventually got to our house. Same deal. Same, no gloves. Walking right up to our house. It's a box on the side of our house. So I'm like, this doesn't make sense, right? From a face validity standpoint, as a researcher, this doesn't make sense. How can you how do you not change gloves? How do you not have some ultraviolet light? I mean, how do you even
They probably can't afford
this,
that, David.
but even the perception, right, Michael? Even wouldn't you, as a government, want to, if you're portraying, right, everything is shut down, safer at home, you can't leave, give fluorescent gloves and a mask to your postal workers and just say every day you have to wear this,
That's true.
because then
Yeah.
psychologically be a psyops, like it would tell people. But the fact that that didn't happen, I recorded it 13 times. I have it on video. I have it time stamped, and I just said this doesn't make sense. This is completely illogical.
You taped your wait, what up? You taped the mailman? Is that what you did,
I
David?
did. I did.
Wow.
Yeah,
Oh shit.
I have 13 different days, and then I also, on those days, I went to I went to the armory in my town, and there was only one day when I saw something that was kind of different than previous days, because I was looking for obviously, where they starting to scale up because there was an airport next to her armory. And I mean, you're hearing all these things, like people are saying the armory, they're getting all these supplies in and all of these flights and stuff. And so I got there, I'm like, yeah, I don't see it. And then we went to playgrounds and they were all taped off with police tape. And I took my daughter with me
Oh wait,
because
that's
I
right. You do have kids. I forgot.
have kids. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
you have
I've
kids.
at
Okay.
the time of COVID, to start in elementary and a middle schooler, since, now an elementary and a high schooler. But yeah, so my daughters.
I feel for you, David. I mean, I don't have any kids, but I know plenty of people who do, and I know this is a very difficult situation for them, or it
Yeah.
has been. So, I feel for you, David. That's a lot of responsibility. I know
Let
you're
me
married, you have kids, you got to look out for them.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, married and children. But yeah, it was what Bundy ran for 4 touchdowns at Polk High. I never did that. I never did that.
like
But
that, by the way. Good
yeah,
reference there, Al Bundy.
so it was
Love
amazing,
that.
right? Because he got drafted in the NFL and played a few seasons and things like that. People don't know that about what the Al Bundy character. But
That's
so here
true.
was one thing that happened though, Michael. So I'm writing about this in my current book, The Velocity of Information, which is fascinating. Be out by the end of the year and all of that. But my daughter, who was 9 years old in March. And so we have to say, we're not going to Disney, and my kids
Disneyland,
handle
yeah.
it really well.
Hmm.
My kids didn't, throw a tantrum or anything like that, but we just said, and they kind of figured out, um, but my 9-year-old's getting messages from her friends, and they're saying, hey, they're ripping up the playground. They have a backhoe and they're taking the playground equipment out, and they have police there and these signs and all this stuff, and they're putting like barricades up in front of the school, and of course she's terrified by this. She's like, what is going on? She can't go out anywhere, like even like biking. Like her friends would come up to the house, can she come out and play? And said, no, not right now. um, but so how does this happen? There's this whole time dilation effect, right? I mean, this time by dilation effect of when you're 9 years old and this happens, this is like 10% of your life. For like me, it's 2% of my life. So this becomes this slow moving huge thing that is all engulfing, like when COVID hits and you're a kid.
Yeah,
This
that's
time
pretty
dilation,
hard.
which I write about, it's really fascinating.
Yeah.
um
That's got to be
so
hard for a lot of the young kids, especially those in high school as well, that, they were going to graduate and
yeah,
had plans to do X, Y, and Z, and all of that is now scraped away.
it really messes with young kids
It's got
versus,
to. It's got
and it
to.
has a weird effect though on old people. And I can share that too, because I
Yeah,
have
yeah.
that already. I have that section already written in my book, like this fascinating interview of elderly. But yeah, so my daughter's 9, and so I can see she's getting very nervous, right? I mean, she's not sure what's happening. Um, so I said, what are you concerned about? I'm concerned about the playground. I'm concerned about the school. I'm concerned about Walmart, all these things. And I said, okay, like we're going to go out today. Like you and I are going to do this video, and it's not going to be public or anything like that. So, and she was great, by the way. Like she's, I've got her doing the camera and we're taking notes, the places we're going to go. And here's what we're going to look for: face validity, right? What you observe, what you actually see. And we got to the playground. The playground was all roped off in police tape. Looked like someone is horrible, like someone had been murdered. There's just this surreal image. I took a lot of photos, and I have a few that'll be in the book. So even for me, like as an adult, I'm looking at this, and it was so unsettling. And also, we were the police pulled up, put the lights on, the bubbles on, and told us to leave. And I'm like, okay, you know, they're kind of in their own mode of, we've got to enforce things and whatever. And I'm like, we're it's this. I'm here with my daughter. We're obviously 6 feet apart, and we're not on the playground equipment. We're kind of doing. They didn't care, just you have to leave. Um, which of course sends a really bad message for my daughter. We get in the car and they follow us for like 2 blocks, and I'm just like, don't worry about it. I'm like, I'm pretty sure they're not going to try to topple your dad over what we just
It's a
did. I
good thing
mean,
you didn't
we're
get
banned.
tased there, by the way, David.
What was that?
I said, I'm glad you didn't get tased, by the way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I've been tased before, so yeah, I know what that's. I know it's in a police training. I was tased. So as a school
I
administrator
was going to say,
too,
where were you? The
right,
Capitol recently, David?
right. Yeah, I haven't. And the funny thing is, right before they tell you that, they're like, you could pee your pants when you do this, and if you do, like, we'll give you a towel and you won't be embarrassed.
By the
I'd
way,
still be
wasn't there a
embarrassed.
police officer who died because he tased himself in the testicles and he had a heart
Right.
attack?
I didn't want that. Like, take that option away. That's off the table. We're not going to do that.
What a way to die, by the way, David. Can you imagine? You get tased and in the
Right.
testicles of all places, and then you have a heart attack and die.
Right. You
Ugh.
never want to,
Wow.
to be published or something come out of you tased in the nuts.
Oh
And
my
that was the cause of
gosh.
death.
His
Like,
poor
yeah,
his poor
that's
family, by the way. That's got to
right.
be so.
For years.
My
For years,
God.
they'll be like, you remember our uncle? Yeah, he died. It
Oh,
was during, he got tased in the nuts, didn't he? Well, no, we don't
jeez.
say that. You died in the line of duty.
My
So,
God.
but yeah, he did get tased in the nuts. He tased himself in the nuts, did he?
I think
I'm
so.
not sure. It's an old story.
Oh my goodness. I don't know if that actually happened or not. We need to look that
I
up.
don't know. This guy's sweet, and he's probably going to listen to the show and be like, I don't know. Oh yeah, I wish I wouldn't have done that. But yeah, I mean, so this thing of face validity. I mean, what do we actually see, Michael? And I had somebody in my network who was a lifetime. He lived in the Bronx. Brian from the Bronx with his family, and he lived in an apartment in the Bronx, and he would go out. And every 2 days he would do these 5-minute videos, and he would show me he'd walk down the street and people would just like shuffle quickly to the other side of the street. They didn't want to make eye contact with them at the bodegas. It's very streamlined. They wouldn't want any conversation. And he said he sent me a video one day. It was maybe like end of April or something like that. And he was so excited. He's like, watch this. And it was some dudes out in front of his apartment complex with leaf blowers. And no one was confronting them. No one's saying you're not essential. You shouldn't be here. Like, that was the thing, right? We were all split into essential or non-essential. All of us were essential or not. So that was a turning point for him. He's like, hey, we're starting to return to some kind of similarity. And I say there's never a normal. There's nothing that's normal, right? But it was crazy because he said it's really stood out. But because we taught, he understood face validity. He was part of my network. And I had another person in my network who was worked in IT, and I had him on the show, Charles Mack, IT, University of Pittsburgh Medical. And he was telling me, oh God, like he would send me pictures. I can say this now. He sent me pictures of his orders. This Chuck is an essential employee, and he should be allowed to come to work at the University of Pittsburgh Medical because of whatever. So he didn't want to send this by email because who knows, right? So he's like,
Good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, who knows who could be reading your emails? Yeah.
Well, right. That's the thing. So he's like, I'm taking a picture of this and don't share this out, at that time. And he was stopped. He was stopped by the police, and they say, where are you going? I'm going to work. I work in IT at University of Pittsburgh Med. And, they let him go. But that happened more times than once. And then he also had an app on his phone that the city of Pittsburgh put together of hot zones of COVID to like avoid. Like, don't go
Right.
to these 3 blocks because there's a lot of people with COVID. Now, again, I'm looking at face validity like, that's just insane to do that. And again, like, if so imagine I'm trying to sell my house a year from now, and a realtor brings this up or whatever, and someone's like, well, you were in, where you live, like, that was kind of the COVID area. So like, I don't want to buy a house from you.
Yeah, that's the diseased peasant area.
That is right. And I'm looking in a big picture though, this will all be out there, right? You'd be able to bring this type of information up.
That's right.
Saying somebody in this house tested positive for COVID or whatever. And these things will start to really impact how we interface with people, how we do commerce, or like I'm having a new floor installed down here in the studio.
Oh, that's right. We talked about that.
So I'm excited because it's a 17-year-old carpet, which is just horrendously outdated and old. But what if I went to the carpet place? I went there this week, and I'm having a wood floor put in down here. It's simulated wood, right? But what if they said, whoa, wait a second, like somebody at your house had COVID, which we didn't. But what if they said, there's a surcharge because we have an extra PPE level that we have to do in order to come into your house, or else they'll say, like, we're not going to come to your house. And that could happen, right? I mean, there's very little from starting
Hey, well,
to
we are getting to that point where you
these layers.
yeah, where you are gonna be required to have some sort of form of ID showing that you were vaccinated, so yeah, that could happen in the future.
Yeah, and to me, that's very frightening, right? I
It's
mean,
dark, but it's gonna happen most likely since we are following in the footsteps of China for sure.
right. And and this is something I would stress to people is understand the social credit score system in China, which has been in place for 3 years. And it just in summary, so I don't know, you have like a top score of 700 or something, and then all your scores are publicly known, and it's based upon what you surf on the internet, your purchases, your volunteer activities, whether you're on time for work, what time, if you're over the speed limit, if you jaywalk. And if you jaywalk, for example, your picture can be put up on a jumbotron, and you can be publicly shamed. It's a different culture, but we're not that far away, right? Like if I've
No, we're
posted something
not.
on Parlor or Twitter and somebody knows that and they're like, well, Parlor's a right wing platform. You posted on it, therefore you're right wing. Um, if I own a certain type of vehicle, if I'm in a certain type of area, all of this stuff, starts to get known. We already have it, like kind of with like, if you go on and get your credit score, imagine that, but now imagine, that this is a publicly known score and all of these other things. And the thing is, like, right, Michael, these aren't objective necessarily. These are subjective. People saying, well, you shouldn't have been in this place at this time, or you shouldn't have written this piece on a blog post because it's anti-government or it's like I've had stuff flagged on COVID, which has been very objective. Like I think the stuff I did with Carl Hop, for
That got
example.
flagged.
Yeah, I had to go in and rework that a little bit.
That's weird.
Yeah, and
For
there's
the
all of
record,
these.
yeah, David, and for the record, let's talk about COVID just from the beginning here. Let's start from the very
Absolutely.
yeah. Let's start from the roots of it all here, going back to COVID when all this first broke out. What were your initial reactions to this, David? Did you think this was all nonsense at first?
So, you know, probably November, my intelligence community started to bring this to my attention. So, I mean, these were folks overseas in Hungary, Italy, um, Soviet Union, Australia, saying, "Yeah, this is starting to ramp up." At least is how it's being portrayed, right? Like we're with stay-at-home orders, restrictions, runs on supplies, things like that. So be aware of this in the U.S. Um, the thing with things with COVID, right? Ultimately, as I have said, we need to look at mortality rate for 2016 versus 2017 versus 2018, 19, 20. And if mortality rate isn't significantly different this year, then why? Like, what is? I mean, it's on pace so far per the Centers for Disease Control and other, you know, uh, agencies that I've looked at, government agencies reporting, total mortality rates. Yeah, we're way down on car crashes and heart attacks, but yeah, what did we see? We initially saw videos coming out of China where people are dying on streets, passing, they're just collapsing and dying.
That was awesome, by
Um,
the way. That
right.
footage, it was like a cheap
so
horror
I'm
movie.
so I'm thinking, holy smokes, right? Everybody, I think back in early March is anticipating this, and now, I'm just, I I struggle with it again, looking at it from a scientific lens,
Right.
looking at this saying, okay, I'm a scientist, right? And a mask. So this was the big thing too. Everybody wear a mask.
The
Well,
mask,
you know,
yes.
as Carl and I, talked and just anybody, the whole thing was what is the difference between somebody making a mask out of a t-shirt, which qualifies as a mask if they get into a store versus an N95 or some other surgical type quality mask. And then
Yes.
I watched a number of professional sporting events. I mean, and I'm like, well, if you took a sample, a 3 by 3 cube of air from where the players are at right now, and then put it into a lab, would that air have coronavirus? And it sounds crazy, but that's exactly what we do when we try to find mold in schools. Like that's a very perfected system. Every year, for example, in Wisconsin, we have 421 school districts, 2,200 school buildings. They do these mold tests, and you basically go into these areas and you take like a cubic air sample of mold, of air sample, and you determine if there's mold or other things in that asbestos, whatever you need to attend to. But so this isn't some bizarre science that we don't have the capacity to do. But so my question is like, why don't you do it? Well, because if you found out, how do you remedy it? Like, what do you do? Like, so if you went into a store, went into a school, a bus, anywhere, and you take this air sample, and it's like, yeah, there's COVID in the air. So like, now what? I mean, you can't retrofit. Like, for example, in my house, I have a new furnace.
Did anyone catch COVID in your household yet?
What was it about?
Did anyone catch COVID yet in your household?
No.
COVID free out there.
No, we
Right
are
on. Good job.
COVID free. And
Good
thankfully,
job.
like I have the blood type, which is the most resistive apparently to COVID. But yeah, I mean, and my neighbors who had COVID tested positive, a few, houses up the road, they were getting pizza deliveries. They were outside
Oh my
raking
God.
leaves, playing football. I mean,
They
it
were
wasn't
spreading
like
it.
it held them back. They were going out. Their vehicles were leaving. They didn't have these restrictions. It's kind of weird. It's, people remember, like polio and the plague back in the day.
David, why didn't you burn their house down?
Right. Right. As a
They're
firefighter, it kind of goes
diseased.
against what you've been taught, but
Yeah.
but even these common sense things, like I'd look and I'd say they just got a delivery from the pizza place, and they walked right up to their house and they exchanged the package, and the pizza dude wasn't wearing any protective gear. Neither were these people. But just see these weird fatigue points, right, in COVID don't make sense. And and so my superintendents, for example, in fall, they were saying, well, they would have all students online for school, so nothing in person for school, all virtual education. But yet they would be running their fall football and volleyball teams and stuff like this in person.
Yeah.
And they said, well, we have procedures in place that if somebody tests positive, then we will suspend all games for 10 days of practice. I don't know what it was, but I said to them, but the deal is, like, you're not testing everybody every day. So and there's a lot of incentive. Like, if I'm a high school senior and this is my last year in football, then we might go to state and I'm not feeling well, for example, I'm not going to report that I'm not going to go in for a COVID test and sync my entire team, right? I'm not going to do that. So I said, this is just, you have this weird psychology that you're applying to this. If you tested everybody every day, which allegedly the NFL or Major League Baseball did, which I'm not, that seems like a real weird setup too. Like, that had a lot of problems with it. But I'm like, this system doesn't make sense, right? Because you're just saying, if somebody feels sick and they happen to go to the hospital and they happen to take a test, this was the whole thing too. Remember Michael, we had this whole thing of, we're going to make all these COVID tests available to American citizens, and they can go
Right.
get them. People were waiting for 8 hours, and I'm looking at that saying, why? I mean, because at that point, like, if, for example, if the test comes back positive, which the test time was what, like 4, 5, 6 days, people are getting notified. Between that 4, 5, 6 days, one, you could come in contact with someone that did have COVID. So if you were tested negative, that doesn't mean that 2 days after you had that test, you didn't come in contact with someone that was positive, and now you're positive. But so what? Like, what happens? Like, how does that change your life? Are you supposed to stay at home? Are you supposed to give a list of people you interact with? But how does that work unless you really have, for example, or they have access to all your cell data? I remember when I bought my car. I have a Buick LaCrosse. I remember I bought it new a couple of years ago. And one of the weirdest parts of that transaction was setting up the OnStar. And
OnStar, yeah.
the guy's like, whatever. But anyway, and the guy said, so do you have kids? I said, yeah, I got kids. Any driving age? No. Well, when your daughter gets to be driving age, like, you can track everywhere the car has been if she's in it. Like, it can record her voice. Like, we can set this up where there's an app and this whole thing, and you can record what happens in the car. I'm like, holy shit.
You could
really?
do that
And
with OnStar. Wow.
And apparently there are these companion apps you can put into the system, and he said, oh yeah, you can monitor. So if she said she's only going to whatever, you can bring it up the next day and it will show you a map of everywhere the vehicle's been. I'm thinking, wow. And I'm also thinking, wow, that's really bad. Like this is crazy.
It is.
And
I mean,
because
David, you could have been one of those parents that install all those apps in their kids' devices and, watch them in real time. I mean, that's kind of creepy.
it is creepy, and it's also this reality, right? I mean, like Edward Snowden type reality of,
Yeah.
well, this is never really off then,
There's
right?
a
Like if I were
keylogger.
to
Yeah.
go, if someone were to file a lawsuit against me, as an expert witness, I've had a lot of experience with how to what discovery looks like for information. So let's say that someone's, said I was at a, there's some lawsuit I'm involved in. I know the lawyer would immediately go to OnStar as a third party, remember third party doctrine, Carpenter versus US, and they would say,
Correct. Yeah.
we need a warrant and we need to know where this vehicle was on these days. And they would provide it, and it would say exactly where it was. And even if you weren't subscribed to OnStar, it doesn't matter, it's there. And so this people need to know this, right? I mean, they need to know that. I mean, you are always being tracked, right? You're always being contact traced. You're always being tracked, and I guess a
Well,
lot of
unless
that is
you're
kind of
unless
benign
you work for
until.
Apple, by the way. I'm sorry, David.
Oh, what was that?
I said unless you work for Apple. I remember Apple refused to unlock one of the shooting the suspect there, if I remember, back in like when
No, I
was that?
remember
It
what
wasn't
you're
that long
saying.
ago. Yeah, there was someone that. When did this happen? I'm trying to remember here. It was someone by the name of Roger, I believe.
Yeah, it was. You're right. It's a few
Roger
years ago. They
McName.
they would unlock so the FBI could get access,
Yeah,
but ultimately they did.
yeah, that
They
was a few years ago in Anaheim, I believe.
Right. And now, and so that's a good question, right? Apple, and now look where Apple kicks Parler off, says
Right.
Parler is not part. So we see this quick erosion. And, we go back to, right, 9/11 was really a big change for the social contract in
Right.
America. Social contract being, we'll have some form of government. And this goes all the way, I wrote about it in my book, Hobbes Leviathan Meets the Twin Towers. It's a chapter in my book. It's pretty fascinating. Going back to like 1500 AD in Great Britain, and how Thomas Hobbes was looking at government, and how he basically came to the conclusion people want some government for some structure, but they don't want a lot of government. But what happened, 9/11, we get all these crazy rules, right? You can only have a small bottle of shampoo. Well, I mean, who made that decision? It's completely arbitrary, right? And like the whole 6 feet right now, social distancing, 6 feet. Well, what? There's no science behind that, right, Michael? I mean, I've looked at this, I've examined this extensively
I think it's
as a
further
researcher.
though, to be honest. I think the droplets, the aerosols, they spread out much further
Right.
than 6 feet.
Right. Right. I
Um,
mean, so
yeah,
that's where I talked about before. You and I were talking. If you actually took a 3 by 3 meter sample of air, which can be done. This is routinely done in industry air samples for asbestos, for air quality, for mold, and things like this. And it's not this crazy science that we're trying to invent. Um, you could objectively find how long this stuff stayed in the air, but that's never been really published. I mean, we have some indications of that, but um, some people have said, well, it stays in the air this long, but we don't really know.
we
I mean,
don't
no
know,
one,
but they say that they
nobody.
say that newer strain that came out, the one that mutated recently, the one from the UK, they say that one stays in the air much longer. I don't know. I'm not a scientist. I can't tell you that, but all I know is I don't want any disease, David. I like social distancing. Even though I have a show like this and I talk to you, I'm kind of like borderline antisocial in the sense that I don't really want to be around too many people to begin with. I like the fact that people have to stay a certain distance from me. I appreciate that. I'm someone who hated standing in lines and having someone
Right.
breathe down my neck.
Right. Yeah,
Right.
and Michael, I would say I'm kind of similar in some regards, because you and I, we talked about this in summer. So I live in Wisconsin, so you kind of have like two seasons, winter and summer. But in summer, I'll go out. I'll get up at 6 in the morning. I'll bike the entire day. Bike like 80, 100 miles an
Yeah,
hour. But I bike by myself.
you're like Lance Armstrong over there.
Yeah, I'm like an older, less fit version of Armstrong. But
The
but
mobster
that's
version.
Right. Right, the mob version. It's
Right.
kinda neat because where I live, so Wisconsin, by the way, has a high density of, Indian effigy mounds, from 1,000 years ago. So I routinely bike past these effigy mounds. It's interesting because nowhere in the else in the world has this. Um, but, um, but yeah, so I'm out, I'm out biking, but I'm a solitude person, right? Like I don't want anybody else with me. I just want, and people are like, uh, it's been my personality since like kind of young on. So I stopped getting the questions of, well, don't you like hanging out with people? I'm like, well, it's not that I don't like hanging out with people. I just like I appreciate solitude.
Yeah.
Lionel Fisher wrote a book on solitude, and I love it. And I talked to Lionel. He died of cancer a few years ago. He's in his 70s. He's like a Marine veteran, but and his book really it resonated with me because it was championing that solitude is just some people's jam. I mean, it's what they get into, and for me, like I love time alone. Like
Me too,
I
David. Yes.
I absolutely find that
But
incredibly
there
valuable.
are those out there, David, that are completely outgoing. Not that I can be, not that you can be, but there are those out there who really depended on going out every time to eat dinner, the New York
Right.
types. So, it really screws up their schedule, but not like someone like me or you. I mean, we're all about loving thyself, being at
Right.
one
Right.
with being alone, being perfectly happy. I mean that describes both of us. I'm pretty sure, pretty good. I mean, we're both comfortable being alone or with other people. It doesn't matter. We're gonna shine either way, right, David?
No, we absolutely will, Michael, and I think that's a strength, for us. And it was kind of funny because my wife pointed out to me a little bit into coronavirus. She's like, this actually plays really into your hand because you don't like hanging out with a lot of people or big groups or stuff like this. And I said, yeah, I don't, even though I present it, in huge venues to people on different topics and stuff like that. I said this doesn't, psychologically, that aspect of it didn't impact me at all because I'm a person that prefers solitude. um but for a lot of people they don't, right? And you and I talked about this, so it's a
Right.
big part of my book. In There's something called finite voltage, and there was so back in July of 1940, when U.S. Is preparing to enter World War II. Actually, that happens, of course, after December 7th, 1941, with Pearl Harbor. But the U.S. FDR um, put forward the Committee for National Morale, which basically yeah, a lot of psychologists, sociologists, artists, so forth. Dr. Seuss was part of that, right? But and they were saying, they were trying to figure out how do we keep civilians upbeat when we know we're going to enter a time of extended chaos. So, they came up with a lot of stuff, just to keep people busy, like scrap drives, paint the roof of your house white, or your barn, whatever, white to reflect light, so it doesn't need as much electricity. So we can put that into the war effort. But they had a lot of interesting other things, like one, a lot of visual representation. It was, what was it at? I think it. Boy, I'd have to go back, take a quick look here at my
Yeah,
thing.
no worries. Yeah, while
I
you
just
do
wrote this.
that, you reminded me back World War II. I remember the Japanese actually had planned to use a biological weapon against civilians in San Diego.
Right,
Yeah, so
right.
biological weapons are nothing new. They've been used forever since since you were able to
Oh,
poison the
right.
well, as they
Yeah,
say,
yeah.
David.
Catapulting, infected bodies, yeah,
Exactly.
over a wall. But
And so that brings me to this question, David. Do you believe that COVID-19 is a bioweapon of sorts?
right, that's a great question, right? And I initially, because I've taken this position before, I'm not going to change from it. I believe this was engineered in a lab in Wuhan. If you look at the larger, set of circumstances happening around Wuhan when the virus was released, the Yangtze River was flooding at an uncontrollable rate. There are many reports on the instability of the Yangtze Dam. So numerous water releases that compromise the cities downstream, including Wuhan. But yeah, I mean, to me, it appears like it's engineered, right? It doesn't. It appears that is an engineered virus that got out of control. Now, in every country, is working on some capacity of engineered bioweapons and so forth. But yeah, I mean, I believe this has the forensic appearance of a biological warfare weapon that was released. Um, so, and I think it was secondary again to the Yangtze River
By the way, I
floods
just want to share
compromising the
this
system.
comment with you, David. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think you might like this one. Truth and Doubt in the chat says, "My wife is a bioweapon."
No, I'm
I'm,
sorry about that. Truth and doubt. Oh my
that
goodness.
must be horrible to be married to the woman you are with their Truth and Doubt. I'm sorry to hear that she is a bioweapon of sorts.
Wow.
My goodness, that was cold-blooded, David.
It is.
I hope
It
his wife
is
isn't
very
listening.
calculated. Yeah, very very
Oh
calculated.
my goodness.
So
Back on
so
track
yeah, I
here,
mean,
yes.
of course, right? This will always be fogged, and no one will ever really know, and all of those type of things. But looking at it, right, it does seem
It does
like
seem a little,
it
yeah,
was,
a little
especially
weird.
the fact that certain people, like my blood type is the most resistive to it, and other characteristics of this where it seems like it's been engineered. And again, I look at the virus, the vaccine, and
Oh
and
yes, the
what do we
vaccine.
really know about the vaccine except that modifies your RNA, and so I'm looking at that and saying, well, again, as a scientist, I know it's probably not a good thing to have your RNA modified. And what do we see now, Michael? Right, you go to the grocery store, and if you buy milk, there's a little tab underneath it, not GMO,
Not
or you buy a
GMO.
cereal, not genetically modified,
Right.
because like this was the big thing 10, 15 years ago. Well, genetically modify so it's resistant to pests and drought or whatever. But
Hmm.
then there's consequences to eating genetically modified foods, right? Um but yeah, this whole thing where your RNA is impacted, I that is a huge red flag.
Well, this is the first
What
time
do we
ever. This is the first time it's ever been injected into a human. And we've had,
Right,
yeah,
right.
so
So
there's
so
some
I'm looking at this, yeah, like
lot to
there
worry about.
hasn't been enough research to me in this whole thing of warp speed or Pfizer. Well, of course, they're trying to get a contract. They're trying to get money.
Trying to get that
Pfizer,
paper.
Moderna. Um, so what are the either short term, long term effects? What does it look like of children? Next generation out when
Exactly. We don't know. We don't really know what's
oh
going to happen later on. And by the way, the world needs to really find out the origins of COVID-19. Who did it? Who's responsible for it? From my point of view and from my understanding, we are just as involved as those in China are with COVID-19.
yeah, looking at how intelligence goes from country to country, and especially within the scientific and medical community, that's a lot more fluid internationally than what people tend to believe. I mean, um, so yeah. I mean, what is the role? Um, and, I mean, these are all great. These are all great questions that will somehow be answered in a forensic analysis, but they'll always still be really fuzzy. Like I mean, the moment
Will
that
they be answered though, David? That's what I'm wondering. Will they actually?
yeah.
Will we finally get the truth? Will the media actually tell us the truth? I mean,
No,
for
no,
since the very
no, I don't think so. Well,
the
I
mainstream
mean,
media has not even told us any of the real science behind the
oh,
virus
right,
itself with HIV-like homology inserted into the protein. I mean, they have not
right.
revealed any of the hard-hitting facts yet. It should make you
You've got it.
question media 100%, no matter what side you lean on. Get that out of your mind. Left and right, who gives a shit? That
Right,
means nothing. In the end,
right,
those people don't. It doesn't matter. It means
right.
nothing, David. You know
Right,
that.
Michael. You're saying, you're pointing out what people need to center on, what they need to think about right now, right? Like
Right.
why haven't we had a 2 hour time block on all media, right? All CBS, ABC, CNN, whatever, where we have scientists from the CDC or whatever, I guess, come in and explain this step by step to us in a layman's terminology format with you know um, with video, with graphics, with all of that to give an understanding of people, to people. But we don't. What we hear, what we just, it's David Muir, breaking news, tonight on
Just filler.
5:30 at ABC,
Yeah.
and it's like that's all hype, right? That's hype. It's not. No one is attempting to do a an education process for people. I guess even I would say education awareness, but wouldn't it seem logical? So I go back and I'm fascinated because when I'm writing my current book, Velocity of Information, by the way, so velocity of information, just in a summary, is um, you know in the first when you look at a disaster, in the first 48 hours, people just try to get information out about it, whether it be a 9/11, COVID, whatever. COVID's a good example. Ventilators became a big buzzword and stuff like that, and it takes like a week until information really gets curated, and then it gets kind of directed at you. You're getting emails from companies that you've done business with, from Target, from Calvin Klein. Hey, Michael, we're here for you. Anything that you need, whatever, Calvin Klein, so forth. But so velocity is speed in a direction. Speed in a direction has changed. So like within 48 hours, all of us are getting inundated with information, like on what we should believe, like what we should these virtue signaling companies and this positionality. But again, we don't. I go back to this Committee for National Morale, FDR, World War II, July 1940. What the committee did a good job of, what World War II did a good job of, the Morale Committee, was educating people to what was happening, like in the war, educating people to supply lines, to how manufacturing, worked, how warehouses got depleted. And I'm kind of oversimplifying some of these things, but we had none of that. And I pointed out in the chapter I wrote today, here's a perfect example, Michael. So back in March, right, when COVID is hitting, the US, this is when the NCAA shuts down,
Word.
NBA, Disney shuts down. So everything's kind of going to hell, right? Stock market drops like, 5,000, 8,000 points.
People are buying toilet paper. Yeah.
People are buying, yeah, toilet paper is wiped out. Hand sanitizer is like gold. What would have made sense, right? What would have made sense is to reboot this Committee for National Morale, this, which existed under FDR, existed across all countries in World War II, kind of was brought back up during the Soviet Union when they had the Chernobyl nuclear meltdown in 1986. But it would have made sense for Trump or whoever's around Trump, whoever's in this administration, to sit down and say, listen, like we know that morale is going to go sideways, that people are going to languish, this is going to get really bad, especially 90 days. We objectively know through studies that when people are in 90 days of chaos, civilians, they start to lose it. They start to suffer depression, anxiety, suicide. These things spike at 90 days. Depression in 1930s, World War II in the 40s, and then Chernobyl in 86 would have been the three examples for that. But we haven't really experienced it since then. But like you would have had this committee that would have got together immediately with the president, vice president, whatever, and said, listen, we need to reboot this Committee for National Morale, like right now. And we need to come up with a national campaign for the next 30 days of like, March 15th, April 15th, to kind of get people like focused and on board, and so they're not languishing, they're not selling all of their stocks or, all this stuff. And they believe there's hope we're going to be able to come out on top of this thing. So I wrote about this, and I wrote about it, today. And I said, it would have made perfect sense to come out. Imagine if President Trump would have come out March 25th, and he's at the White House, and he said, we are launching the Fitness and Fortitude campaign It's very interesting the language you have to use on this is studied by the Germans in World War II versus like campaign versus phase versus stuff. But anyway, imagine this. Imagine if this would have happened. Today we are, we are announcing the Fortitude and Fitness campaign. We have a government website where you're going to be able to log in. We're going to give you information on nutrition and fitness. We know that nutrition and fitness increase immunity. We want you to be able to increase your immunity right now, which will make you, more likely that you will not get COVID, or if you do get COVID, you'll be able to recover, better. And we're going to call this the Fitness and Fortitude campaign. You log in, we're going to send you a patch. Now, this sounds crazy, right? You'd be like, why a patch? Well, the thing is, Michael, in World War II, that Dr. John Apple found that soldiers in the infantry, frontline infantry, when they gave them the blue patch for their uniform,
Yes.
that actually increased their morale. They were able to stay on the front longer. In 238 days in the military, you were either killed, captured, or a victim of psychological collapse. So anyway, you could have put this together, and now I'm like creating something, right? I'm like saying this, you'd have to create this. The thing is, you don't really have to create this. In 2015, the military, the U.S. Army created what was called the Civilian Fitness Program, and they created it for all of the civilians who worked for the Army to help them with fitness. So they could go on a website, they could log in, they could track things, they could get like little badges, bonuses, stuff like this. It already existed. So and then in addition to this, it was in July of 2020, the Institution of Health or Health Sciences came out with a study saying, for COVID, if you eat better and you work out, you're probably less likely to get COVID.
Right.
If you do, like, you're probably going to recover better. So this is a national it's a multinational study that came out in July of 2020. So the thing is, why didn't that happen? Like, I'm looking at this saying, it's obvious when you hit a crisis situation, which is going to occur more than 1 month in 2 months, right? You follow this pattern of every 30 days, you break it up and you have something different. Why didn't you do this? So it's perplexing to me because this would have made perfect sense. You could have scaled this up in literally a week for anybody to have access. You could have worked with Apple and Google and said, listen, they have an Apple Fit watch, they can log in. You could do crazy things too. Like you could say, we'll give you a tax credit. If you participate in this and you do some fitness stuff, we'll give you $100 tax credit for next year. But it's psychological, it's psyops, right? It's people thinking, okay, I'm in control. I have locus of control. I have control over myself and I'm doing something. I'm not just sitting here trying to knit 10 t-shirts together into a mask, or I'm not trying to sanitize my phone with bleach because I saw my favorite celebrity do it. And this was very well laid out in this Committee for National Morale in World War II. What worked very, very well. And I'm like, how the hell did that not get rebooted? Like, and it never got rebooted. Like, there's nothing to that effect. Now we have no national campaign for civilian morale, which is bizarre. And it could be bipartisan, right? It could benefit both parties. I don't see this as being shut down. I mean, if I'm President Trump in March and someone brings this to me, I'd be like, yeah, we're all in. We're going to do this. And who's against this? Like, there's no opposition to it. You empower people. You already have the structure through the Army. So I think we have to ask these questions, right, Michael? Like,
they're very important questions.
The question to me is, so when I get in the book, I'm like, why isn't this there? Why hasn't this been rebooted?
I think that's one of the things that we could thank COVID for bringing all of us, not just death, David, but it's really sort of shined the light on all of our sort of in every area where we are very weak as a country. COVID has sort of shined its light on that. It's sort of made us really reevaluate our own lives. I mean, I did. I'm not sure about you, David, but I really reinvented myself this year. Well, last year, I should say.
Yeah, well, tell me more about that.
Well, I was not in the same mindset whatsoever, David, last year. I transformed into a different person, I would say. I'm not the same man I was last year or the year before. I really
And I'm going to
just
press you. So
go
so
ahead,
tell
go
me
ahead. Yeah,
tell
go
me
ahead.
give me the comparison. Tell me what's different.
Well, I no longer work in the same place. I mean, that really made me happy. You really don't know how happy you are until you leave your job, David.
I know. No, I do know
Oh, you
that.
do know.
Trust
Shit, then
me.
you do know.
I do know that.
Right, so that's also a part of it. I just changed everything about just the way I think and the way I um, live my life, David. Everything has sort of changed in a way. I
So,
no longer
I think
think about the
there are
same things I
positive
do.
aspects of
Yeah,
COVID,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
There are
There are many,
positive.
very many positive things that this has brought to all of us.
Yeah.
For those that have been patient enough and had that sort of drive in them to reinvent themselves. Other people, not so much. They didn't really take this time. They didn't really take the advantage that the time was given to us to really do something with themselves.
Right. 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 It has given people a time to reevaluate. Yeah, what's important to them.
That's what COVID has done. You really
Um,
find out what's important and what isn't.
and and so here's a question that comes up to me, or here's a statement that people will say, and then I usually will throw it back at them and ask them to study it a little bit. And they'll say, "I just want things to return to normal, David. I just want things to return to normal."
Oh,
And
that's
I'm
not
like,
going to happen.
"Yeah." I'm like, "Well, yeah, let's think about that." One is first is there is no normal. That's normal. And I wrote about that in School of Airs, my book School of
Yes,
Airs.
sir.
There is no normal. Every day is always different,
That's
and
right.
we progress. There is a I wrote a chapter about this in my current book, Philosophy of Information. Regress to the mean. The mean is always changing. Like right now, what's different now versus March? Well, we have remote learning. For all levels, like we remote learning, we can do our jobs remotely. Some of us can. We don't have to go into the doctor for an appointment. We can do a tablet or an iPad. We can do like some type of remote meeting. So we have that going on, so that's really good.
Yes.
We don't
COVID
have to
brought
drive
us,
into work, right? We don't
yeah,
have a commute. We don't have to spend an hour a day on a commute. So there are things, battery life, right? So I have a friend who's an engineer. He said, Dave, in the last 8 months, the investment and the breakthroughs we've made in technology are through the roof,
I
like
bet,
battery
yes.
life. And so he's like, would you really want to return to February of 2020? And I'm like, no, I wouldn't. Like there are these things that come together, right? Um, but yeah, so it is this thing where I think people get people long for what did it write? Nostalgia or
They
tradition.
do, right. They
They
wanna
they
remember like, people in our lives, they wanna remember you like a character from, Cheers.
Yeah.
You never change.
Yeah, like, "Hey, it's Norm. Hey,
It's David,
Norm."
yeah.
Um, and you're right. People go back, and when I did a graphic for the velocity of information, which was really thorough from March of 2020 to December 2020. A graphic representation of what happened. And also we had really weird things happen that people didn't pick up on, like all these new terms in our vocabulary: essential worker, um, social distancing, um,
Right.
PPE. So there were like 17 terms that came in. And I have a background. I had a master's in speech language pathology. I worked as a speech language pathologist. I studied linguistics, and I said it's very rare to have in any year one word go from vocabulary to lexicon. So lexicon is what you and I use every
Yes,
day.
sir.
And in 2017, one word made it from vocabulary to lexicon. That word was spaghetti map, believe
Spaghetti.
it or not. Spaghetti map. So
Spaghetti map.
spaghetti map is because there were hurricanes that year, Irma and Harvey. It was like it looked like a bowl of spaghetti had been dropped on top of Florida, and it would be like, here are
Oh,
potential routes the hurricane could go. So
interesting.
that it became a term, in our lexicon. And right now, though, we have all these terms which are in our lexicon, such as social distance. So if I
Social
say to you,
distancing, fake
social
news.
distancing, you know what it means. I got to be
Right.
6 feet away from you,
And, like,
right?
fake news and all these other cute
Fake news.
words. Yeah, I mean,
Essential, yeah.
everyone now is a wise guy, everyone now has a cute little nickname for everything. Yeah, I see it, yes.
It really has messed with vocabulary and lexicons. and that also it's a psychological toll, and especially on younger people. And I mentioned this earlier in the show, and I want to cycle back to it. So I had a close friend of mine who's a mental health professional, and she said that her siblings contacted her and said, "You know what? I think Dad has dementia or like Alzheimer's."
Oy
Uh,
vey. How dare she say that?
so her siblings are contacting her. She's a mental health professional, so she's able to make this assessment. So she meets with her dad, and she doesn't see them quite as frequently as they do, and she meets with them and whatever, and her conclusion is, yeah, dad's fine, but dad no longer goes to the casino because it's been shut down. A lot of things that dad kind of did have changed, so like they're not having the baseball games in town that he used to, like, go down to and watch and things. So like time doesn't mean much to dad. Like it doesn't mean much to dad if today is Monday, because they're like, dad doesn't know what day it is. And she's like, well, but he doesn't need to know what day it is. Like, when she was asking him questions, he knew, the answer to questions. He's able to do what's called a kind of a mini mental exam of able to add when were you born, these type of things and questions and problem solve. But like he was disconnected from time. It didn't matter to him anymore. And NCAA tournament was shut down, which he was like really into. He's like, in his 80s. And she said there's nothing wrong with him at all. Like, but this is just the environment, right? He doesn't need. This has all changed around him. All the stuff that he used to participate in has been shut down. The
Yeah.
county meetings that he used to go to and just sit in the
Bingo
audience
is
and just be there.
gone. Yeah.
Yeah. But this was really weird for her siblings because they wanted to pathologize, and that's something too. I wrote about in my book or the book I'm writing right now is, a lot of people are trying to pathologize, and the elderly, a lot of them have just kind of drifted off. Like I have a lot of elderly, relatives, and they're kind of like,
They don't even know
well,
what's going on in the world right now. They probably don't even know.
they don't
Yeah.
know. They're asking me, what's going on,
Or why is everyone wearing a mask? Why are they? Why does everyone look like a ninja?
why does everyone look like a ninja? What's happening? And there's certain things like also like I think
I kind
you
of want
don't.
dementia now. I think I want that.
It is it's so it is this kind of weird liberation. And the other part was she's like, she said my siblings wanted to force this reality onto my dad, right?
Oh no.
Her dad of
Yeah.
his age. Like the reality is, COVID had shut these things down and whatever and things. And I'm like, that's pretty brutal to do that. There's no empathy in that. Like, why? I mean, the guy's 85, 86 years old.
Yeah.
Got a couple of years left. I mean, who cares? He's not going out, confronting the postman of this is some
Right.
conspiracy and trying to, to tip over the postal vehicle with his tractor or something. I mean, it's just, so some of this is, I think Michael and you do, you've done a great job. I really appreciate your show, by the way. But
Thank
there's
you.
an empathy part
Thank
of
you.
this. There is an empathy part of this, and I had somebody very close to me who contacted me in March when COVID was we had the safer at home orders, all the schools were shut down in Wisconsin, and nobody knew what was going on. Like everyone's like, are the stores going to be closed? Are we all going to be, have to register before we go out somewhere? We're going to have an hour. And a very close contact of mine said the state border is closed. You can't go to Illinois. Not that I want to go to Illinois anyway. I'm like, nope. And the only time I went to Illinois, I skipped right past the toll booth and you never find
Nothing important there. You don't want to go there, David. Don't worry. That's the last place you want to be. Don't go there.
Yeah, there's it's just doesn't have an impact on me. But the part, the part was so. But he's telling me this, and he's like, I'm like, well, where did you hear this from? Like, were you down there? No, I wasn't down there. I heard this from people who were trying to cross the border and they weren't allowed to cross. But right there, it's not firsthand information. It's this whole I observed. And then I'm like, okay, so you start to pick it apart a little bit more, and he's not certain on the information he's giving me. So I have two choices at that point. One is I can press him. I can be like, tell me who's telling you this. Like, give me a link, give me a phone number, and I'll call them right now. And I want them to take a picture, and I'll share this out because I do have a robust network of people I'm working with. This is very important information to turn into intelligence. But instead of doing that, I just said to him, I said, I have a different set of information than you have right now. We have different sets of information. The information I have isn't bringing me to the conclusion that you have, that the border's closed. So I'll try to gather more information, and then we can touch base, later on with this. But what I did is I preserved his dignity, right? I didn't smash him, and that's the thing. Like
That's a
some of
good
these
thing.
people with their parents and their elderly parents, they're trying to smash them. You must believe in, all of the, whatever's
That's not
happening
the
in
route. Yeah,
COVID, and
that
the
that's the
fiat
wrong.
currency, and Italy's going to collapse, and we're all going to
Yeah.
be everything's going to go to hell. And I'm like, you don't need to break
You don't need to
people.
do it that way. Yes, it's very true. I mean, it's always the way you say things. It doesn't really matter what you say, it's how you say them, David. It goes a long way, and that's what I learned. I learned that the hard way, and there are some people that you can't really sort of just, bury them that way. You gotta be very light with some people, and I think that's kind of the mistake even the president might have done. He what I think, this is just my opinion, people can believe whatever the I was gonna say the F word. People can
Right.
believe whatever they want, I don't care. But here's the thing, I think one of the ways I think he really dropped the ball, David, in my opinion, is the fact that he did not win his enemies over. He did
Right.
not study the art of war properly, David. You're always supposed to win your enemies over. That's how you defeat the enemy.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's
I'm
and
dangerous, David.
no.
I would know.
No, no, yeah, I agree, Michael, right? And that seems really fascinating to look at that from a corona optic of saying, especially if, that from March on to not be very overt, at least in a public eye, that um you're trying to work across the aisles in um, I guess not only defeating Corona. I don't know if that's the answer. I don't know what the campaign would be, but that it's very unified. I mean, because to me, wasn't it Reagan back in the Reagan presidency said, if we had aliens and a UFO attack the
That's a
world, we
great
would all
speech.
unite.
Yes, sir.
and
Great speech.
and right, it was. And actually, President Trump could have used that
Yes, sir.
type of approach and said we need, and not only that, but you could have been this unifying force across countries. And so whoever is informing the president, I mean, a lot of this too is like, I'm like, I love the movie The American President with Michael J. Fox,
Oh,
by
great
the way,
film.
but but I'm like, who is informing the president? Because like, bring me on board. I would have a very logical way to have you present things that would portray a very unifying effort. And whether you're genuine or not, I would hope you're genuine. But I mean, this is this is really bizarre. And like what I just talked about, like how we should interact with elderly people
Right, right.
who are um, disrupted or separated from their schedule. No one's doing that. Like, I this is a thing that really burns me. Okay, so so here's an example. I wrote a piece for Crisis Response Journal about the Notre Dame Cathedral fire, right? So when Notre Dame burned, um, I was watching that, right, and I knew people in France, and I did a little bit of quick study on it. And like a day later, I came out and said, like what was it? 800 tons of lead were vaporized. So I brought up the map of the air cloud of the lead, and I knew exactly where this was landing. And I said, all these areas are screwed. Like these are all death zones for the next 20 years. And of course, like I was contacted, please take that down. And I mean, there was some very heavy, influence to coming down on me of saying, please retract these comments and things. I said, well, this is all true, right? I mean, there's nothing. We know that lead in bodies of water, lead in soil, have these areas. So what should really happen, right, is they should be taking samples of people in these areas where the cloud of 800 tons, and that might not be accurate, but I mean, it was this cloud of lead which was vaporized, and lead vaporized is a relatively low temperature compared to where the wood was burning. But all these people should be tested and for lead in their blood, and then they should there's ways to remediate this. There are treatments to remove lead from blood, but it's very expensive, so it's like it never happened. But the other part was, Macron the next day came out, President Macron, standing in front of the still burning, the embers are still like, red hot behind him. And he said, and I wrote about this again in my current book, he said, we're going to rebuild, Notre Dame no matter what it costs. And so I wrote about this, and it's published. It's out there in Crisis Response. A great article, one of the best I ever wrote. But I said, stupid thing to say, absolutely stupid, because maybe you shouldn't rebuild it. Like, I mean, what if the engineers come to you and say, like, yeah, this thing is pretty much toast? I mean, like,
I almost forgot that it burned down back in 2019.
Right. So the thing was, billions of dollars to repair this, but the thing is, like, should you really repair it? Like, did it make sense to repair it, or maybe preserve part of it and use the money elsewhere? But but the thing was that was
the less churches, the better, in my opinion, David. But
so,
that's just my opinion. I'm wrong about everything, so
So I'm going at this and saying, well, the part of this though that what this is conveying is this whole thing I wrote about in my first book is the torus, or self-similarity. People will fight to not have things change. They want things to be similar. We saw that in 9/11, people in the towers, they stayed at their desks for 4 minutes before leaving because, this isn't actually
people are
happening.
afraid to change, David. Yes.
So this whole thing of Macron, what he did is he just was trying to bring force the similarity, or force this torus, Torus, which I wrote about extensively again. Torus theory. It's kind of my expertise, right? Torus theory, finite voltage.
You're a wild man, David.
So yeah, I am a wild man.
Dr. David.
I said a stupid thing for him to do, but then of course David Muir, the next, 2 days later, he's over there and he's got he takes his bare hand and he wipes it across a piece of wood, and all of the dust collects on it, and his hand is caked. Then he's like, so much lead here, so it's such a dangerous area for you. And, he doesn't have a mask or anything. This is just, theatrics. This is stupid of you. Like, you're an idiot, man. But of course, you have a big following and people, and you have to rebuild. And so this is where people get confused. Like, they want to get back to what's similar and what's familiar in nostalgia. And they don't stop and pause and say, does it really make sense to rebuild the cathedral? I mean, does it really make sense to do some of these things to get back to where we were? Like, does it make sense to get back to in-person learning for K-12 or for colleges, or should some of this always be online, or more of it be online now? Or I mean, so this is a question I think COVID has kind of forced us to. And
yeah, it's ushered us into that.
We fight this torus, this Torus, with self-similarity of people not wanting to realize when things are changing and accept. It's like, imagine any of us right now, power goes out, we're in a blackout. So like the first 2 minutes we're probably chilling. Okay, power is going to come back on. Like 20 minutes we're like, well, what the hell? Why doesn't the power come back on? And then 20 hours from now we'd be like, well, whoa, like I've got to start to game plan this. Like, my fridge is going to go, the stuff I have in my fridge is going to go bad. There's other considerations. So that's the thing, is like everybody is always in this mode of the power is going to go back on, and they don't take these opportunities to say, well, maybe there's a lot of good things that'll come out of this. Like for me personally, I have a bachelor's degree, 2 masters, and a PhD, which is I would not advise that upon anybody as a route to a career. But maybe like down the road, if you're 18, I mean, like maybe 18-year-olds coming out now, you get a certification program in computer coding or something like that, and by 20 you've got your certification, you're out working. Like, you're not doing this big investment. Because what have we seen? Like all these college towns shut down.
Yeah, that's another thing. Yeah, that's another thing that we will have to sort of see where this leads us. I mean, that's really thrown a pitchfork, or a fork rather, into everything really, in terms of education, in terms of viable education. I mean, if I get a degree in like what's a very useless degree besides communications?
Anthropology.
Yeah, what am I going to do with that?
Right. Yeah. So I say that because when I was in college, I had to take an anthropology class, and I remember we had to flint knap, which was making the flints that would go on the end of arrows, and our instructor had the Kohler company, which made toilets, They would
Right.
they brought him all of their defective toilet tops that go on the back of your
Yeah.
toilet, and apparently if you chip these off with a sharp rock, it would create a flint. And so I remember doing this as part of a class lab, and my hands were all cut up and bleeding. And he's like, "Oh, you're doing it right," all this stuff. I'm like, "But why am I doing this? Like, what's the deal here?"
But
I'm
now
like,
you have a Hep C, David.
I have Hep C.
Is it
I'm
worth
I'm
it?
never going to be able to look at my toilet the same way again after this experience. And I'm like, I get it. Like, you could have just told us this is how they did, but it was this whole weird thing, right? Like, and all I went back through all the courses I took, and actually my PhD courses were very valuable. I mean, once you get into a PhD program in a rigorous university, I think there's a different tier there, but so much stuff that I took
Right.
which was completely useless, completely useless, and just this whole thing of what college experience and putting people into debt and then
Yeah.
indoctrinating them. I remember I burned all of my high school grades 2 years ago. My parents kept them in a box, all
Really?
of my grade reports, and they brought them up to me, and they said, here's your grade from 10th grade English
They kept
or
all
whatever.
that?
And I'm like, well, okay, you can do whatever you want with these. I'm like, well, I'm going to
Right.
burn them. I have a wood fireplace. I have no use for this. But I read through them before I burned them, and actually some of them were pretty snarky, and I did well as a student, I guess, and stuff like that. And but I'm kind of like looking at this thing, what an asshole. Like, here I am. I have a PhD. I've been on PBS twice. I have a published book. I have another significant book coming out. And who are you to take this shot at a kid, a 16, 17-year-old. I mean, now at the time I didn't really pay attention to it, but as I was going through this, I'm like, what did you ever do in your life that kind of reached the level of some of the stuff that I've done or some of the people that I interact with? I mean, it was this weird feeling. It wasn't depressing or anything, but it was this weird thing to read how people, the little comments they would write. And others were great, but some of them were really, and I don't know. I mean, were they jealous at the time of some of the things, or like, I don't. It was strange. It was a strange experience to read through those.
It reminds me of the internet and comments. The comment section.
The comment section. I remember I did a video. I went you talk about life changes and things. So it was back in, God, was it 2014? I left a high paying, high profile job. We had a change in management. It was really it was time for me to leave. It was a very frictionless exit. I talked about that on another show. I won't get into it in this show, but as you said, these times in life. So, and I left this position, which was the greatest thing for me, by the way. And that's one thing I would tell anyone in your audience, and share that, post that. If you've left a position that's just sucking the life out of you, even though you got paid really well for it, like, good for you. Like, good for you, because life is short, right? Like,
Life
2
is
years
short.
ago, it was January 18th of 2019. I was in a serious multi-car accident, and I remember, like, EMS and fire saying, "Oh God, it's a miracle you weren't killed." I mean, because they're looking at the vehicle or looking at where I was, and I'm like, so I mean, yeah, I mean, if you're in this position where you've exited a job that hasn't brought has been dragging you down, good for you. I mean, that you got out of that situation. But I got out of this job, and the next summer, I had some time free, and my dad and I, we did like a couple weeks. We went to like state parks. We just like did a road trip for 2 weeks, and we were up north in Superior, Wisconsin, Superior, Duluth, and they have a harbor. And these 1,000-foot freighters come in and out of this harbor. It's really awesome. I mean, just to think about that. And next to it, they have this ore mine in Hibbing, Minnesota, where they, during the World War II, they got most of the ore for the boats and tanks and all that from this mine. So we went there on a day they were doing a blast, and I had my camcorder and I did a video of this blast, which was pretty phenomenal, right? Because they don't do these very often. I posted online, and somebody like downvoted it, and I'm like, who the hell downvotes a video of a blast of an ore mine? I mean, it was awesome. It was this fascinating clip, and I didn't, but I'm, as you said, I'm just kind of like, it's just somebody who's just needs to be negative, because there's nothing negative about this video. It's just it's a cool video, right? It's a little cool video clip. But as you said, there are people who I think just feel like the internet can be their place to elevate themselves by being negative against other people.
Yeah, but sometimes
And
you need those negative comments, though. They are fun to read.
well, yeah, they are fun. They are fun to read. And you're right. And everybody will. This whole thing, I learned about confirmation bias, when I was doing my PhD program. People will see things the way that they want to see things. And I remember when I presented both times on PBS. So when you present on PBS in front of a live audience, what doesn't get shown on TV is you're required to stay afterwards and answer questions from the audience, which can take like
Q&A. I didn't know
yeah.
that. Okay.
Oh yeah. So then when the camera goes off and all that, then
you still got to work.
Yeah. So
Okay.
in 2013 it was maybe 2 hours, and it was probably more like 5 hours in 2019.
Shit. Okay.
And actually, like, a group went down to a bar with me, like, that was like 3 blocks away from the studio. And,
okay.
And it was this crazy experience, Michael. And actually, I couldn't even find my car. Not that I was intoxicated. I wasn't.
That.
It was a rainy night. I had a
park. And this was for ramp. PBS.
and honestly, like, I had like 12 people. I had an app that would try to locate my car. It's when I bought that Buick, and people are like trying to help me find my car, and it was ridiculous, right? But because they're fans of me, like, they watched me present.
You didn't have OnStar at the time, David.
I don't know what was going on, but it was the strangest night, because there was severe weather. I remember that night. Which was wild, because part of the presentation had talked about this F5 tornado, which had struck like 30 miles away, like 10 years ago. But so the thing is, like, you're answering questions, and people obviously want to have you validate, because you're an expert, right? I'm standing up in front. I've just been on national TV. They want you to validate whatever experience they've had. So they're saying, in my school district, or my experience with chaos, like, I've had this, and it's, it sounds like you're on board with that, right? And I'm like, well, yeah, kind of. I mean, I don't know your context and situation, but it was very evident to me of people kind of just came to there was a certain amount of the audience that just came to have me back up the way that they believed. Like, that was their own purpose, was to say, this guy backs up how I feel about whatever, or social media, or mental health, whatever. And I had some people really twist their questions and stuff.
That's how people are, David. Yeah.
It stood out. So, and I mean, I had people, and it's awkward, right? Because, like, you give one person one time to answer a question, and then they come back and with a follow-up question to follow up. I'm like, shit, there's like 400 other people here. I mean, like, we gotta, you're not the whole show.
You gotta wrap it up, I would say.
It's weird. But yeah, I think that's another thing that I've learned later in my career, is the positionality of people. People want to see things that align to their beliefs.
Exactly.
And they don't want debate, right?
No,
they don't want debate. They don't want to read the negative comments. They don't want to read, they don't want to get an email from someone who says, hey, I watched your presentation and whatever. And I welcome that. And I feel confident, especially when you write a book that is very controversial industry in school safety. When I wrote School of Errors, I knew I would never get a job again as a school administrator when I published that book. When I worked through a publishing house to do it, and it's an awesome book, right? It's absolutely outstanding. But I knew once I wrote it, and once I challenged the industry, I was done.
Your career was up. Yeah.
That was it. It was the final slamming up. But it was an honest book. It's truthful. It's fully cited. Strong index. So no one has been able to challenge the book. No one's been able, it's been out there since 2019. The book is rock solid. I think it's had positive impacts with parents through the in the industry overall. But it's a bold move, right? It's a bold move to actually say to the publisher, under contract, go ahead and put it out, and kind of sign that. It's like signing the Constitution. Who was it? Like, or not Edison, but Thomas Jefferson wrote it. Wrote his name very large, so even without glasses, you'd be able to read it. So he's like, I know I'm signing my death warrant here if we lose. if we lose, our battle with Britain. And it was that way with School of Theirs. It was a very risky move to write that book, um, and yet it is the most honest book about school safety. It's chaos theory. It's telling you why schools are paying $3 billion a year for stuff that doesn't make them safer. All the crazy stuff to indoctrinate your kids into this hyper realistic safety theater, which is just causing psychological damage. Um, so I mean, I was able to take on the biggest players and win. I mean, because I knew what I was doing. Again, a lot of them aren't scientists, right? I mean, I'm a scientist, and I was able to not only hold my own, but to win. I was brought in to testify against a bill which would have allowed schools to basically circumvent building codes for doors, and you could put it in any type of lock system you want. So imagine, Michael, you're in a building, and in order to get out, you have to pull the handle down, enter a 4-digit code, and like sing a song.
My,
I mean, something like that.
what
So
a
I mean,
headache.
you had right, and I don't sing well, so I'd be screwed right there. I'd be locked in the room. But so you have all these multi-layer systems that would have been sold to schools, for example. And I said, before I testified on this, and I have the testimony. It's like 10 minutes. It never made it public, but when I testified, 5 minutes later, the bill was shut down. They said, we're not going to win this. There's no way because I said every kid with a disability, there's no way in hell they'll get out of this room if you're going to put the handle down. Plus, remember a 4-digit, even if the 4-digit code is written up above, type in this code on this keypad. I said, you're going to, these people will die.
Yeah,
I mean,
they're going to forget the code.
The Our Lady of Angels fire in Chicago. I mean, I wasn't alive at that time, but I studied it extensively. I said, this is horrible. Like, this is crazy legislation. And if you do this, people will die. This will be a matter of time. It'll happen. And but the fact was, I was I was so powerful in the presentation. Plus, again, on PBS twice, published author, numerous books, PhD.
Yeah, they didn't want a lawsuit on their hands, David. That's for sure.
Well, and I'm an expert legal witness, so
That's
I know how
right.
this works. So I kind of pointed that out, and it shut it down. And I'll never forget how I felt after that, because I felt, wow, like I've seen this happen before, but one person has a lot of power, and I have that testimony. It's interesting because it's a NDA, so it wasn't a public testimony. It was before the legislature, but I have a copy of it because I said, obviously I'm not going to do anything unless I have a copy, because you could twist my words. So I need a copy.
Right. Yeah. Good thinking there. And David, I hate to do this, but David, we are kind of coming up on a close here, but yes, finish. Yeah, go ahead. It's okay.
No, you kind of learn those things, right, as an expert witness, of how to protect yourself too. I always say to people, we can have this conversation, but it's going to be recorded. You can have a copy, I can have a copy, but it's going to be recorded, because you're not going to, manipulate what I say, or, likewise.
It's a good move.
And as I do that in the book, for example, I interviewed, very high, very, people with careers that could be significantly impacted if I incorrectly quoted them. So I said, I'll record it. I will send you a copy of I'll have it transcribed professionally. I'll send you a copy. I'll maintain a copy. You can review it beforehand. And then after that, if it goes to press and you have a problem with it, it's on your hands, not mine. But yeah.
Very nice. Well, David, I would love to continue this conversation with you, and I'm sure my listeners would love to listen to the rest of this. So I would have to bring you back on in the near future, David. It's been a blast to talk to you. And of course, if anybody wants any more information on Dr. David Perrodin here, you can visit schooloferrors.com. And I believe it will take you to an Amazon link where you can find his book. I think that's correct, right, David?
It is. Yeah, that'll take you right in. And yeah, and the book actually, sells robustly. It's in hundreds of libraries across the world. I just saw it, pop down to like 100,000 a couple days ago.
Nice.
So there's like 23 million books on Amazon. So it all countries, except it's banned in Germany.
Banned.
It actually is banned because of the chapter on professional standards of learning. Germany banned the book.
Germany banned
so
the book.
So you're screwed.
Wow, I had no idea Germany would do that. I love, German engineering is probably the finest in the world, in my opinion. I can't help but put over the Germans and their engineering. Many of the products I've owned that are German engineered have always been top talent. They've lasted forever. I don't know what it is about those Germans out there, but they know something.
They do. And I have a lot of friends in Germany, and also friends at the university level in Germany, and they're wonderful. I mean, they're outstanding folks, and they rib me too. They're like, because I've been able to get my book over to them, which is kind of like a samostat thing, right? Like, and one of them actually uses it in a university course. But I guess at
The
its own
satanic
peril.
work of David Perrodin in Germany.
Yeah, there's a bad thing. Like, I don't know if I could ever. And Merkel's gone, but I don't know if I could ever work my way into Germany at this point.
That's funny. On the
So
no-fly zone, the no-fly list here, David Perrodin, it's been an honor and pleasure to have you here. It's been fantastic. It's been a top talent show. And before we cut loose with you, David, is there anything you'd like to mention before we part ways here?
yeah, absolutely. So likewise, I've thoroughly enjoyed this evening, and I love your work,
Thank you.
Michael.
Thank you.
So like I said, I shared with you, and I shared with people. I listened to several hours of your content.
And I apologize for every hour, David.
Yeah,
I
right.
know it was very it was very vulgar, some of the words that you heard there. So I apologize greatly. I
Wow.
know it's not for everyone, but it is entertaining and it is better than a fatal car accident. That's for
It is.
sure.
It is. Well, it's in my wheelhouse, and I appreciate it. And I ultimately think these type of conversations, this type of dialogue is what will be elevated, and what people will seek this out. Citizen journalism,
Right.
and I've written about that too. And so I think we're in this fascinating part of this almost samizdat, Massmizdad. Samizdat, just look it up, kind of like how that was happening in the Soviet Union back in the 80s, how people were getting information that was really authentic versus the state narrative. And I think you provide that. And I know you provide that. And I appreciate that. People want to follow my work, check out safetyphd.com. Please subscribe to my channel on YouTube. I appreciate it. It's kind of a niche market, right? Anyone talking about school and community safety,
Very.
there's
Yeah.
not a lot of people interested. But again, once you get into that zone, I think I'm kind of one of the best in there. And then there are a lot of guests I've had on who will fascinate you. Larry Lawton, America's biggest jewel thief. Like, listen to me interview Larry about how he found
Crazy.
out about 9/11. I interviewed a guy who was Rob Travis, who was on an Alaskan crab boat for 122 days, most dangerous job
Wow.
in the world, by Bureau of Labor Statistics. And he talked about, every day you almost got killed.
Yeah, I would
And
imagine that's
so
not a
he's
place for me to
he's
be on a boat there. Yeah.
so these stories. So yeah, so go through, and I think you're going to find some shows that you're going to be like, yeah, I want to listen to this. I want to download this and listen to it. And it's all about contributing to the knowledge base. Kind of like obviously what Michael's doing, and I really appreciate people who have an interest in my work. Yeah, it's very authentic. So again, safetyphd.com. You can kind of find everything that you need there. And thank you. I've been following the chat on a different monitor, and I don't type very very well, very fluently, but I'm so thankful. Creative Accident has made many creative accidents. Thank you. So many terrific posts here. The Other Side, Matt Friend, so forth. Just thank you so much.
Yeah, they're a wild
all
bunch,
of
but they
you.
enjoyed you there, David.
So I appreciate that. I appreciate them too. I've been reading the comments, and again, if I would have paid more attention in high school, of typing in my typing class,
Yes.
I'd be much better at responding to all of you.
No worries, David. They like you regardless. Once again, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for being a part of the program, David. We will do it again in the near future.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael.
You got it, brother. Take care.
You too. Thank you.
Mahalo. And there he goes, boys and girls. That was Dr. David Perrodin, PhD. And yes, I still have him up here on Zoom. And I do want to thank him and thank all of you out there for being a part of the program as well. It's been a fun time. And before we pull this Larry Silverstein style, I do want to thank all of you out there in the chat room, those of you who will listen to the podcast rendition of this program. Much thanks to you. And of course, I must thank our other friends that are listening to us on TalkStream Live. In due time, Yes, you can listen to this program on TalkStreamLive.com. And of course, we have found ourselves another home on the Conspiracy Radio Network, which is 24/7. You can go there anytime you'd like and listen to all kinds of shows, many familiar faces, familiar voices you might have heard of in the past. Yes, CRN. Look for us there. And of course, how can I forget those of you out there who are a part of the Patreon series? I do want to thank all of you out there for supporting the program through Patreon. It's been fun and lots of content coming to you very, very shortly over on Patreon. I believe Mike Hideous will be joining me on a very special Patreon series. Hope you guys sign up. And of course, I'm looking at the time. Yes, it is almost 9:30. That means it is time for me to wrap it up. Once again, boys and girls, it's been fun. We will do it again on the other side. And with that said, the world is a mysterious place, and life itself is a mystery. Until next time, mahalo.
I don't want to pinpoint it because, well, I think you kind of know the answer to that.
Paradox?
Yes, you discussed that with Goldberg, and he has a good finger on it.
Yes.
Hey, listen, also, beyond Von Daniken, pay attention to Whitley. Whitley is also not who he would appear to be. Be very careful of Dr. Hoagland. Hoagland has secrets. He knows things. And he hasn't even begun to indulge his treasure of secrets.
All right. I appreciate the call. Dr. Goldberg is not who he says he is. Whitley is not who he says he is. And watch out for Richard Hoagland. Earth changes, tsunamis for the Northwest sometime no later than August. Okay. Time Traveler line at area code 702-727-1295.